12. On Eel Stretch. Gaskell's map reading had misled him, and they were nowhere near Frogwater Reach or Fen Broad. The situation was getting on everyone's nerves. Gaskell's attempts to mend the engine had had the opposite effect. The cockpit was flooded with fuel oil, and it was difficult to walk on deck without slipping. Jesus, gee, anyone would think to look at you that this was a goddamn oil rig, said Sally. Oh, it was that fucking fuel line, said Gaskell. I couldn't get it back on. So why start the motor without it? To see it was blocked. So, now you know. So what you going to do about it? Sit here till the food runs out? You got to think of something. Why me? Why don't you come up with something? If you were any sort of man... Shit, said Gaskell, the voice of the liberated woman. Comes the crunch, and all of a sudden I've got to be the man. What's up with you, man, woman? You want us off here? You do it. Don't ask me to be a man, uppercase M. In an emergency, I've forgotten how. There must be some way of getting help, said Sally. Oh, sure. You just go up top and take a crow's nest at the scenery. All you get is a bean feast of bulrushes. Sally climbed on top of the cabin and scanned the horizon. It was 30 feet away and consisted of an expanse of reeds. There's something over there looks like a church tower, she said. Gaskell climbed up beside her. Well, it is a church tower. So what? So if we flashed a light or something, someone might see it. Oh, brilliant. A highly populated place like the top of a church tower is bound to be people just waiting for us to flash a light. Oh, couldn't we burn something? Said Sally. Somebody would see the smoke and... You crazy? You start burning anything with all that fuel oil floating around us, they'll see something all right, like an exploding cruiser with bodies. Well, we could fill a can with oil and put it over the side and float it away before lighting it. And set the reed beds on fire. What the hell do you want, a fucking Holocaust? Gee, baby, you're just being unhelpful. I'm using my brains is all, said Gaskell. You keep coming up with bright ideas like that. You're going to land us in a worse mess than we're in already. I don't see why, said Sally. I'll tell you why, said Gaskell. Because you went and stole this fucking Hesperus, that's why. I didn't steal it, You tell the fuzz that, just tell them. You start setting fire to reed beds and they'll be all over us asking questions, like whose boat is this, and how come you're sailing someone else's cruiser. So, we gotta get out of here without publicity. It started to rain. That's all we need, rain, said Gaskell. Sally went down into the cabin, where Eva was tidying up after lunch. God, geez, hopeless. First of all, he lands us on a mud bank in the middle of nowhere. Then he fucks the motor but good. And now he says he doesn't know what to do. Why doesn't he go and get help? Asked Eva. How? Swimming? G couldn't swim that far to save his life. He could take the airbed and paddle down to the open water, said Eva. He wouldn't have to swim. Airbed? Did I hear you say airbed? What airbed? The one in the locker with the life jackets. All you've got to do is blow it up and... Honey, you're the practicalist, said Sally, and rushed outside. Gee, Eva's found a way for you to go and get help. There's an airbed in the locker with the life jackets. She rummaged in the locker and took out the airbed. You think I'm going to go anywhere on that damn thing? You've got another thing coming, said Gaskell. Well, what's wrong with it? In this weather? Have you ever tried to steer one of those things? It's bad enough on a sunny day with no wind. Right now, I'd end up in the reeds, and anyhow, the rain's getting on my glasses. All right, so we wait till the storm blows over. At least we know how to get off here. She went back into the cabin and shut the door. Outside, Gaskell squatted by the engine and toyed with the wrench. If only he could get the thing to go again. Men, said Sally contemptuously. Claim to be the stronger sex, but when the chips are down, it's us women who have to bail them out. Oh, Henry's impractical too, said Eva. It's all he can do to mend a fuse. I do hope he isn't worried about me. Ah, he's having himself a ball, said Sally. Not Henry. He wouldn't know how to. Well, he's probably having it off with Judy. Eva shook her head. No, he was just drunk, that's all. He's never done anything like that before. How would you know? Well, he's my husband. Husband, hell. He just uses you to wash the dishes and cook and clean up for him. What does he give you? Just tell me that. Eva struggled with her thoughts inarticulately. Henry didn't give her anything very much, not anything she could put into words. He needs me, she said finally. So, he needs you. Who needs needing? That's the rhetoric of female feudalism. So, you save someone's life. You've got to be grateful to them for letting you? Oh, forget Henry. He's a jerk. Eva bristled. Henry might not be very much, but she didn't like him in being insulted. Gaskell's nothing much to write home about, she said, and went into the kitchen. Behind her, Sally lay on the bunk and opened the center spread of Playboy. Gaskell's got bread, she said. Bread? Money, honey. Green stuff. The stuff that makes the world go round, cabaret-wise. You think I married him for his looks? Oh, no. I can smell a cool million when it comes by me, and I do mean by me. I could never marry a man for his money, said Eva primly. I'd have to be in love with him, I really would. So you've seen too many movies. You think Gaskell was in love with me? I don't know, I suppose he must have been. Sally laughed. Oh, Eva, baby, you are naive. Let me tell you about G. G's a plastic freak. He'd fuck a goddamn chimpanzee if it was dressed up in plastic. Oh, honestly, he wouldn't, said Eva. I don't believe it. You think I put you on the pill for nothing? You go around in that bikini and Gaskell's drooling over you all the time. If I wasn't here, he would have raped you. He'd have a hard time, said Eva. I took judo classes. Well, he'd try. Anything in plastic drives him crazy. Why do you think he had that doll? I wondered about that. Right, you can stop wondering, said Sally. I still don't see what that has to do with marrying you, said Eva. Then let me tell you a little secret. Gaskell was referred to me. Referred? By Dr. Freeborn. Gaskell had this little problem, and he consulted Dr. Freeborn, and Dr. Freeborn sent him to me. Eva looked puzzled. But what were you supposed to do? I was a surrogate, said Sally. A surrogate? Like a sex counselor, said Sally. Dr. Freeborn used to send me clients, and I'd help them. Well, I wouldn't like that sort of job, said Eva. I couldn't bear to talk to men about sex. Weren't you embarrassed? Oh, you'll get used to it. And there are worse ways of earning a living, so G comes along with his little problem, and I straightened him out, but literally, and we got married. A business arrangement. Cash on the tail. You mean you... I mean, I have Gaskell, and Gaskell has plastic. It's an elastic relationship, the marriage with a two-way stretch. Eva digested this information with difficulty. It didn't seem right somehow. Didn't his parents have anything to say about it? She asked. I mean, did he tell them about you helping him and all that? Say? What could they say? G told them he'd met me at summer school, and Pringsy's greedy little eyes popped out of his greasy little head. Baby, did that little man have penis projection. Sell? He could sell anything. The Rockefeller Center to Rockefeller. So he accepted me. Old Ma Pringsheim didn't. She huffed and puffed and blew, but this little piggy stayed right where the bank was. G and me went back to California, and G graduated in plastic, and we've been biodegradable ever since. I'm glad Henry isn't like that, said Eva. I couldn't live with a man who's queer. G's not queer, honey. Like I said, he's a plastic freak. Well, if that's not queer, I don't know what is, said Eva. Sally lit a cigarillo. All men get turned on by something, she said. They're manipulable. All you got to do is find the kink. I should know. Oh, Henry's not like that. I'd know if he was. So, he makes with the doll. That's how much you know about Henry. You telling me he's a great lover? We've been married 12 years. It's only natural. We don't do it as often as we used to. We're so busy. Busy Lizzie. And while you're housebound, what's Henry doing? Well, he's taking classes at the Tech. He's there all day and he comes home tired. Taking classes, taking asses. You'll be telling me next he's not a sidewinder. I don't know what you mean, said Eva. He has his piece on the side. His secretary knees up on the desk. He doesn't have a secretary. And students' prudence screws their grades up. I know, I've seen it. I've been round colleges too long to be fooled. Oh, I'm sure Henry would never. That's what they all say, and then, bingo, it's divorce and bobby sex. And all you're left to look forward to is menopause and peeking through the blinds at the man next door and waiting for the fuller brush man. You make it all sound so awful, said Eva. You really do. It is, Eva Tits. It is. You gotta do something about it before it's too late. You gotta liberate yourself from Henry, make the break, and share the cake. Otherwise, it's male domination doomside. Eva sat on the bunk and thought about the future. It didn't seem to hold much for her. They'd never have any children now. They'd never have much money. They'd go on living in Parkview Avenue and paying off the mortgage. And maybe Henry would find someone else. And then what would she do? And even if he didn't, life was passing her by. I wish I knew what to do, she said presently. Sally sat up and put her arm round her. Look, why don't you come to the States with us in November, she said. We could have such fun. Oh, I couldn't do that, said Eva. It wouldn't be fair to Henry. No such qualms bothered Inspector Flint. Wilt's intransigence under intense questioning merely indicated that he was harder than he looked. We've had him under interrogation for 36 hours now, he told the conference of the murder squad in the briefing room at the police station, and we've got nothing out of him. So this is going to be a long, hard job. And quite frankly, I have my doubts about breaking him. I told you he was going to be a hard nut to crack, said Sergeant Yates. Nut being the operative word, said Flint. So it's got to be concrete evidence. There was a snigger, which died away quickly. Inspector Flint was not in a humorous mood. Evidence, hard evidence, is the only thing that's going to break him. Evidence is the only thing that's going to bring him to trial. But we've got that, said Yates. It's out the bottom. I know exactly where it is, thank you, Sergeant. What I'm talking about is evidence of multiple murder. Mrs. Wilt is accounted for. Dr. and Mrs. Pringsheim aren't. Now, my guess is that he murdered all three, and that the other two bodies are... He stopped and opened the file in front of him and hunted through it for notes on violence and the break-up of family life. He studied them for a moment and shook his head. No, he muttered. It's not possible. What isn't, sir? Asked Sergeant Yates. Anything's possible with this bastard. But Inspector Flint was not to be drawn. The notion was too awful. As I was saying, he continued, what we need now is hard evidence. What we've got is purely circumstantial. I want more evidence on the Pringheims. I want to know what happened at that party, who was there, why it happened, and at the rate we're going with Wilt, we aren't going to get anything out of him. Snell, you go down to the Department of Biochemistry at the university and get what you can on Dr. Pringsheim. Find out if any of his colleagues were at that party. Interview them. Get a list of his friends, his hobbies, his girlfriends if he had any. Find out if there's any link between him and Mrs. Wilt that would suggest a motive. Jackson, you go up to Rossiter Grove and see what you can get on Mrs. Pringsheim. By the time the conference broke up, detectives had been dispatched all over town to build up a dossier on the Pringheims. Even the American Embassy had been contacted to find out what was known about the couple in the States. The murder investigation had begun in earnest.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette, side 8.
Inspector Flint walked back to his office with Sergeant Yates and shut the door. Yates, he said, this is confidential. I wasn't going to mention it in there, but I've a nasty feeling I know why that sod is so bloody cocky. Have you ever known a murderer sit through 36 hours of questioning as cool as a cucumber when he knows we've got the body of his victim pinpointed to the nearest inch? Sergeant Yates shook his head. I've known some pretty cool customers in my time, and particularly since they stopped hanging. But this one takes the biscuit. If you ask me, he's a raving psychopath. Flint dismissed the idea. No, psychopaths crack easy, he said. They confess to murders they haven't committed, or they confess to murders they have committed, but they confess. This Wilt doesn't. He sits there and tells me how to run the investigation. Now have a look at this. He opened the file and took out Wilt's notes. Notice anything peculiar? Sergeant Yates read the notes through twice. Well, he doesn't seem to think much of our methods, he said finally. I don't much like this bit about low level of intelligence of average policemen. What about point 2D, said the inspector. Increasing use of sophisticated methods such as diversionary tactics by criminals. Diversionary tactics. Doesn't that suggest anything to you? You mean he's trying to divert our attention away from the real crime or something? Inspector Flint nodded. What I mean is this. I wouldn't mind betting that when we get down to the bottom of that fucking pile, we're going to find an inflatable doll dressed up in Mrs. Wilt's clothes and with a vagina. That's what I think. But that's insane. Insane? It's fucking diabolical, said the inspector. He's sitting there like a goddamn dummy, giving as good as he gets, because he knows he's got us chasing a red herring. Sergeant Yates sat down, mystified. But why? Why draw attention to the murder in the first place? Why didn't he just lie low and act normally? What, and report Mrs. Wilt missing? You're forgetting the pring times. A wife goes missing, so what? Two of her friends go missing, and leave their house in a hell of a mess and covered with bloodstains. That needs explaining, that does. So he puts out a false trail. But that still doesn't help him, objected the sergeant. We dig up a plastic doll doesn't mean we're going to halt the investigation. Maybe not. But it gives him a week, while the other bodies disintegrate. You think he used an acid bath like Haig? Asked the sergeant. That's horrible. Of course it's horrible. You think murder's nice or something? Anyway, the only reason they got Haig was that stupid bugger told them where to look for the sludge. If he'd kept his trap shut for another week, they wouldn't have found anything. A whole lot would have been washed away. Besides, I don't know what Wilt used. All I know is that he's an intellectual, a clever sod, and he thinks he's got it wrapped up. First, we take him in for questioning, maybe even get him remanded, and when we've done that, we go and dig up a plastic inflatable doll. They can look right Charlie's going into court with a plastic doll as evidence of murder. He'll be the laughing stock of the world. So, the case gets thrown out of court, and what happens when we pick him up a second time for questioning on the real murders? We have the Civil Liberties Brigade sinking their teeth into our throats like bleeding vampire bats. I suppose that explains why he didn't start shouting for a lawyer, said Yates. Of course it does. What does he want with a lawyer now? But pull him in a second time and we'll have lawyers falling over themselves to help him. They'll be squawky about police brutality and victimisation. You won't be able to hear yourself speak. These bloody lawyers will have a field day. First plastic dolls, and then no bodies at all. They'll get clean away. Anyone who can think that little lot up must be a madman, said the sergeant. Or a fucking genius, said Flint bitterly. Christ, what a case. He stubbed out a cigarette resentfully. What do you want me to do? Have another go at him? No, I'll do that. You go up to the tech and chivvy his boss into saying what he really thinks of Wilt. Get any little bit of dirt on the blighter you can. There's got to be something in his past we can use. He went down the corridor and into the interview room. Wilt was sitting at the table making notes on the back of a statement form. Now that he was beginning to feel, if not at home in the police station, at least more at ease with his surroundings, His mind had turned to the problem of Eva's disappearance. He had to admit that he'd been worried by the bloodstains in the Pringsheim's bathroom. To while away the time he'd tried to formulate his thoughts on paper, and he was still at it when Inspector Flint came into the room and banged the door. "Right, so you're a clever fellow, Wilt," he said, sitting down and pulling the paper toward him. "You can read and write, and you've got a nice, logical and inventive mind. So let's just see what you've written here. Who's Ethel?" "Eva's sister," said Wilt. "She's married to a market gardener in Luton. Eva sometimes goes over there for a week." And blood in the bath." "Oh, just wondering how it got there." "And evidence of hurried departure?" "I was simply putting down my thoughts about the state of the Pringsheim's house," said Wilt. "You're trying to be helpful." "I'm here, helping you with your inquiries. That's the official term, isn't it?" "It may be the official term, Wilt, but in this case it doesn't correspond with the facts." "I don't suppose it does very often," said Wilt. "It's one of those expressions that covers a multitude of sins." "And crimes." "It also happens to ruin a man's reputation," said Wilt. "I hope you realize what you're doing to mine by holding me here like this. It's bad enough knowing I'm going to spend the rest of my life being pointed out as the man who dressed a plastic doll with a cunt up in his wife's clothes and dropped it down a pit hole without everyone thinking I'm a bloody murderer as well. Where you're going to spend the rest of your life, nobody's going to care what you did with that plastic doll," said the inspector. Wilt seized on the admission. "Ah, so you found it at last," he said eagerly. "That's fine. So now I'm free to go." "Sit down and shut up," snarled the inspector. "You're not going anywhere, and when you do, it'll be in a large black van. I haven't finished with you yet. In fact, I'm only just beginning." "Here we go again," said Wilt. "I just knew you'd want to start at the beginning again. You fellows have primary causes on the brain. Cause and effect, cause and effect. Which came first? Chicken or the egg, protoplasm or demiurge? I suppose this time it's going to be what Eva said when we were dressing to go to the party." "This time," said the inspector, "I want you to tell me precisely why you stuck that damn doll down that hole." "Now that is an interesting question," said Wilt, and stopped. It didn't seem a good idea to try to explain to Inspector Flint in the present circumstances just what he had had in mind when he dropped the doll down the shaft. The inspector didn't look the sort of person who would understand at all readily that a husband could have fantasies of murdering his wife without actually putting them into effect. It would be better to wait for Eva to put in an appearance in the flesh before venturing into that uncharted territory of the wholly irrational. With Eva present, Flint might sympathize with him. Without her, he most certainly wouldn't. "Let's just say I wanted to get rid of that beastly thing," he said. "Let's not say anything of the sort," said Flint. "Let's just say you had an ulterior motive for putting it there." Wilt nodded. "I'll go along with that," he said. Inspector Flint nodded encouragingly. "I thought you might. Well, what was it?" Wilt considered his words carefully. He was getting into deep waters. "Let's just say it was by way of being a rehearsal." "A rehearsal? What sort of rehearsal?" Wilt thought for a moment. "Interesting word, rehearsal," he said. "Comes from the old French, rehearser, meaning to hell with where it comes from," said the inspector. "I want to know where it ends up." "Sounds a bit like a funeral, too, when you come to think of it," said Wilt, continuing his campaign of semantic attrition. Inspector Flint hurled himself into the trap. "Funeral? Whose funeral?" "Anyone's," said Wilt blithely. "Hearse, rehearse. You could say that that's what happens when you exhume a body. You rehearse, though I don't suppose you fellows use hearses." "For God's sake!" shouted the inspector. "Can't you ever stick to the point?" You said you were rehearsing something, and I want to know what that something was. An idea, a mere idea, said Wilt. One of those ephemera of mental fancy that flit like butterflies across the summer landscape of the mind, blown by the breezes of association that come like sudden showers. I rather like that. I don't, said the inspector, looking at him bitterly. What I want to know is what you were rehearsing. That's what I'd like to know. I've told you. An idea. What sort of idea? Just an idea, said Wilt. A mere, so help me God, shouted the inspector. If you start on those fucking butterflies again, I'll break the unbroken habit of a lifetime and wring your bloody neck. I wasn't going to mention butterflies this time, said Wilt reproachfully. I was going to say that I had this idea for a book. A book? Snarled Inspector Flint. What sort of book? A book of poetry or a crime story? A crime story, said Wilt, grateful for the suggestion. I see, said the inspector. So you were going to write a thriller? Well, now, let me just guess the outline of the plot. There's this lecturer at the Tech, and he has his wife he hates, and he decides to murder her. Go on, said Wilt. You're doing very well so far. I thought I might be, said Flint delightedly. Well, this lecturer thinks he's a clever fellow who can hoodwink the police. He doesn't think much of the police. So he dumps a plastic doll down a hole that's going to be filled with concrete, in the hope that the police will waste their time digging it up. And in the meantime, he's buried his wife somewhere else. By the way, where did you bury Mrs. Wilt, Henry? Let's get this over once and for all. Where did you put her? Just tell me that. You'll feel better when it's out. I didn't put her anywhere. If I've told you that once, I've told you 1,000 times. How many more times have I got to tell you that I don't know where she is? I'll say this for you, Wilt, said the inspector when he could bring himself to speak. I've known some cool customers in my time, but I have to take my hat off to you. You're the coolest bastard it's ever been my unfortunate experience to come across. Wilt shook his head. You know, he said, I feel sorry for you, Inspector, I really do. You can't recognize the truth when it's staring you in the face. Inspector Flint got up and left the room. You there, he said to the first detective he could find. Go into that interview room and ask that bastard questions and don't stop till I tell you. Oh, what sort of questions? Any sort, just any. Keep asking him why he stuffed an inflatable plastic doll down a pile hole. That's all. Just ask it over and over again. I'm going to break that sod. He went down to his office and slumped into his chair and tried to think. 13. At the Tech, Sergeant Yates sat in Mr. Morris's office. I'm sorry to disturb you again, he said, but we need some more details on this fellow Wilt. The head of Liberal Studies looked up with a haggard expression from the timetable. He'd been having a desperate struggle trying to find someone to take bricklayers for. Price wouldn't do, because he had mechanics too, and Williams wouldn't anyway. He'd already gone home the day before with a nervous stomach and was threatening to repeat the performance if anyone so much as mentioned bricklayers for to him again. That left Mr. Morris himself, and he was prepared to be disturbed by Sergeant Yates for as long as he liked, if it meant he didn't have to take those bloody bricklayers. Anything to help, he said with an affability that was in curious contrast to the haunted look in his eyes. What details would you like to know? Just a general impression of the man, sir, said the sergeant. Was there anything unusual about him? Unusual? Mr. Morris thought for a moment. Apart from a preparedness to teach the most awful day-release classes year in and year out without complaint, he could think of nothing unusual about Wilt. I suppose you could call what amounted to a phobic reaction to the Lord of the Flies a bit unusual, but then I've never very much cared for... if you could just wait a moment, sir, said the sergeant, busying himself with his notebook. You did say phobic reaction, didn't you? Well, what I meant was... To flies, sir. to The Lord of the Flies. It's a book," said Morris, now uncertain that he'd been wise to mention the fact. Policemen were not noticeably sensitive to those niceties of literary taste that constituted his own definition of intelligence. "I do hope I haven't said the wrong thing." "Oh, not at all, sir. It's these little details that help us build up a picture of the criminal's mind." Mr. Morris sighed. "I'm sure I never thought, when Mr. Wilt came to us from the university, that he'd turn out like this." "Quite so, sir. Now, did Mr. Wilt ever say anything disparaging about his wife?" "Disparaging? Oh, dear me, no. Mind you, he didn't have to. Eva spoke for herself." He looked miserably out of the window at the pile-boring machine. "And in your opinion, Mrs. Wilt was not a very likeable woman?" Mr. Morris shook his head. "She was a ghastly woman," he said. Sergeant Yates licked the end of his ball pen. "You did say ghastly, sir?" "I'm afraid so. I once had her in an evening class for elementary drama." "Elementary?" said the sergeant and wrote it down. "Yes, though elemental would have been more appropriate in Mrs. Wilt's case. She threw herself into the parts rather too vigorously to be wholly convincing. Her Desdemona to my Othello is something I'm never likely to forget." "An impetuous woman, would you say?" "Let me put it this way," said Mr. Morris. "Had Shakespeare written the play as Mrs. Wilt interpreted it, Othello would have been the one to be strangled." "I see, sir," said the sergeant. "And I take it she didn't like black men." "I've no idea what she thought about the racial issue," said Mr. Morris. "I'm talking of her physical strength." "A powerful woman, sir?" "Very," said Mr. Morris, with feelings. Sergeant Yates looks puzzled. "It seems strange a woman like that allowing herself to be murdered by Mr. Wilt without putting up more of a struggle," he said thoughtfully. "It seems incredible to me," Mr. Morris agreed. "And what is more, it indicates a degree of fanatical courage in Henry that his behaviour in this department never led me to suspect. I can only suppose he was insane at the time." Sergeant Yates seized on the point. "Then it's your considered opinion that he was not in his right mind when he killed his wife?" "Right mind? I can think of nothing right-minded about killing your wife and dumping her body." "I meant, sir," said the sergeant, "that you think Mr. Wilt is a lunatic?" Mr. Morris hesitated. There were a good many members of his department whom he would have classified as mentally unbalanced, but he hardly liked to advertise the fact. On the other hand, it might help poor Wilt. "Oh, yes, I suppose so," he said finally, for at heart he was a kindly man. "Quite mad. Between ourselves, Sergeant, anyone who's prepared to teach the sort of bloody-minded young thugs we get can't be entirely sane. Only last week, Wilt got into an altercation with one of the printers and was punched in the face. I think that may have had something to do with his subsequent behaviour. I trust you will treat what I say in strictest confidence. I wouldn't want—" "Oh, quite so, sir," said Sergeant Yates. "Well, I needn't detain you any longer." He returned to the police station and reported his findings to Inspector Flint. "Nutty as a fruitcake," he announced. "That's his opinion. He's quite positive about it." "In that case, he had no right to employ the sod," said Flint. "He should have sacked the brute." "Sacked him? From the tech? You know they can't sack teachers. You've got to do something really drastic before they give you the boot. Like murdering 3 people, I suppose. As far as I'm concerned, they can have the little bastard back." "You mean he's still holding out?" "Holding out? He's counter-attacking. He reduced me to a nervous wreck, and now Bolton says he wants to be relieved. Can't stand the strain any longer." Sergeant Yates scratched his head. "Beats me how he does it," he said. "Anyone would think he was innocent. I wonder when he'll start asking for a lawyer." "Never," said Flint. "What does he need a lawyer for? If I had a lawyer in there handing out advice, I'd have got the truth out of Wilt hours ago." As night fell over Eel Creek, the wind increased to gale force 8. Rain hammered on the cabin roof, waves slapped against the hull, and the cabin cruiser, listing to starboard, settled more firmly into the mud. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with smoke and bad feelings. Gaskell had opened a bottle of vodka and was getting drunk. To pass the time, they played Scrabble. My idea of hell, said Gaskell, is to be closed with a couple of dykes. What's a dyke? Said Eva. Gaskell stared at her. You don't know? Well, I know the sort they have in Holland. Yoga bear, said Gaskell. You are the naivest. A dyke is... Forget it, G, said Sally. Whose turn to play? It's mine, said Eva. I-M-P spells imp. O-T-E-N-T spells Gaskell, said Sally. Gaskell drank some more vodka. What the hell sort of game are we supposed to be playing? Scrabble or some sort of truth group? Your turn, said Sally. Gaskell put D-I-L-D on the O. Try that for size. Eva looked at it critically. You can't use proper names, she said. You wouldn't let me put in Squeezy. Eva tits. Dildo is not a proper name. It is an improper thing. A surrogate penis. A what? And never mind what it is, said Sally. Your turn to play. Eva studied her letters. She did not like being told what to do so often, and besides she still wanted to know what a dyke was, and a surrogate penis. In the end, she put L, O, and V on the E. Is a many splendid thing, said Gaskell, and put D-I-D on the L and O. You can't have two of them, said Eva. You've got one dildo already. This one's different, said Gaskell. It's got whiskers. What difference does that make? Ask Sally. She's the one with penis envy. You asshole, said Sally, and put F-A-G-G-O on the T, meaning you. Like I said, truth scrabble, said Gaskell. Trouble, for short. So why don't we have an encounter group instead? Let the truth hang out like it is. Eva used the F to make faithful. Gaskell followed with hooker, and Sally went insane. Great, said Gaskell. Alphabetical I Ching. Wunder can you slay me, said Sally. Go Zelda yourself, said Gaskell, and slid his hand up Eva's thigh. Keep your hands to yourself, said Eva, and pushed him away. She put S and N on the I. Gaskell made Butch with the B. And don't tell me it's a proper name. Well, it's certainly not a word I've heard, said Eva. Gaskell stared at her and then roared with laughter. Now I've heard it all, he said. Like cunnilingus is a cough medicine. How dumb can you get? Go look in the mirror, said Sally. Oh, sure. So I married a goddamn lesbian whore who goes around stealing other people's wives and boats and things. I'm dumb. But Boobs here beats me. She's so fucking hypocritical, she pretends she's not a dyke. I don't know what a dyke is, said Eva. Well, let me inform you, fatso. A dyke is a lesbian. Are you calling me a lesbian? Said Eva. Yes, said Gaskell. Eva slapped him across the face, hard. Gaskell's glasses came off, and he sat down on the floor. Now, gee, Sally began, but Gaskell had scrambled to his feet. Right, you fat bitch, he said. You want the truth, you're going to get it. First off, you think husband Henry got into that doll off his own bat? Well, let me tell you. Gaskell, you just shut up, shouted Sally. Like hell I will. I've had about enough of you and your rotten little ways. I picked you out of a cat house. That's not true. It was a clinic, screamed Sally. A clinic for sick perverts like you. Eva wasn't listening. She was staring at Gaskell. He had called her a lesbian and had said Henry hadn't got into that doll of his own accord. Tell me about Henry, she shouted. How did he get into that doll? Gaskell pointed at Sally. She put him in there. That poor goof wouldn't know. You put him there? Eva said to Sally. You did? Oh, he tried to make me, Eva. He tried to... I don't believe it, Eva shouted. Henry isn't like that. I tell you he did. And you put him in that doll? Eva screamed and launched herself across the table at Sally. There was a splintering sound, and the table collapsed. Gaskell scudded sideways onto the bunk, and Sally shot out of the cabin. Eva got to her feet and moved towards the door. She'd been tricked, cheated, and lied to, and Henry had been humiliated. She was going to kill that bitch, Sally. She stepped out into the cockpit. On the far side, Sally was a dark shadow. Eva went round the engine and lunged at her. The next moment she'd slipped on the oily deck, and Sally had darted across the cockpit and through the door into the cabin. She slammed the door behind her and locked it. Eva Wilt got to her feet and stood with the rain running down her face. And as she stood there, the illusions that had sustained her through the week disappeared. She saw herself as a fat, silly woman who had left her husband in pursuit of a glamour that was false and shoddy and founded on brittle talk and money. And Gaskell had said she was a lesbian. The full nausea of knowing what touch therapy had meant dawned on Eva. She staggered to the side of the boat and sat down on a locker. And slowly, her self-disgust turned back to anger and a cold hatred of the Pringheims. She would get her own back on them. They'd be sorry they ever met her. She got up and opened the locker and took out the life jackets and threw them over the side. Then she blew up the airbed, dropped it into the water, and climbed over herself. She let herself down into the water and lay on the airbed. It rocked alarmingly, but Eva was not afraid. She was getting her revenge on the Pringheims, and she no longer cared what happened to her. She paddled off through the little waves, pushing the life jackets in front of her. The wind was behind her, and the airbed moved easily. In 5 minutes, she'd turned the corner of the reeds and was out of sight of the cruiser. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, there was the open water, where they had seen the dinghies, and beyond it, land. Presently, she found herself being blown sideways into the reeds. The rain stopped, and Eva lay panting on the airbed. It would be easier if she got rid of the life jackets. She was far enough from the boat for them to be well hidden. She pushed them into the reeds, and then hesitated. Perhaps she should keep one for herself. She disentangled a jacket from the bunch and managed to put it on. Then she lay face down on the airbed again and paddled forward down the widening channel. Sally leant against the cabin door and looked at Gaskell with loathing. "You stupid jerk," she said. "You had to open your big mouth. So what the hell are you going to do now?" "I'll divorce you for a start," said Gaskell. "I'll alimony you for all the money you got." "Fat chance. You won't get a red cent," Gaskell said, and drank some more vodka. "I'll see you dead first," said Sally. Gaskell grinned. "Me dead? Anyone gonna die around here is you. Booby baby is out for blood. She'll cool off." "You think so? Try opening that door if you're so sure. Go on. Unlock it." Sally moved away from the door and sat down. "This time you really bought yourself some trouble," said Gaskell. "You had to pick a goddamn prize fighter." "Will you go out and pacify her?" said Sally. "No way. I'd as soon play blind man's buff with a fucking rhinoceros." He lay on the bunk and smiled happily. "You know, there's something really ironical about this. You had to go and liberate a Neanderthal. Women's lived for Paleolithics. She Tarzan, you Jane. You bought yourself a piece of zoo." "Very funny," said Sally. "And what's your role?" "Me, Noah. Just be thankful she hasn't got a gun." He pulled a pillow up under his head and went to sleep. Sally sat on, staring at his back venomously. She was frightened. Eva's reaction had been so violent that it had destroyed her confidence in herself. Gaskell was right. There had been something primeval in Eva Wilt's behavior. She shuddered at the thought of that dark shape moving towards her in the cockpit. Sally got up and went into the galley and found a long, sharp knife. Then she went back into the cabin and checked the lock on the door and lay down on her bunk and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. There were noises outside. Waves lapped against the side of the boat. The wind blew. God, what a mess it all was. Sally clutched her knife and thought about Gaskell and what he'd said about divorce. Peter Braintree sat in the office of Mr. Gosdyke, solicitor, and discussed the problem. He's been in there since Monday, and it's Thursday now. Surely they've no right to keep him there so long without his seeing a solicitor. If he doesn't ask for one, and the police want to question him, and he's prepared to answer their questions and refuses to demand his legal rights, I don't really see that there's anything I can do about it, said Mr. Gosdyke. But are you sure that's the situation? Asked Braintree. As far as I can ascertain, that is the situation. Mr. Wilt has not asked to see me. I spoke to the inspector in charge. You heard me. And it seems quite clear that Mr. Wilt appears, for some extraordinary reason, to be prepared to help the police with their inquiries, just as long as they feel his presence at the police station is necessary. Now, if a man refuses to assert his own legal rights, then he has only himself to blame for his predicament. And are you absolutely certain that Henry has refused to see you? I mean, the police could be lying to you. Mr. Gosdyke shook his head. I've known Inspector Flint for many years, he said. He's not the sort of man to deny a suspect his rights. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Braintree. I would like to be of more assistance, but frankly, in the circumstances, I can do nothing. Mr. Wilt's predilection for the company of police officers is quite incomprehensible to me, but it disqualifies me from interfering. I don't think they're giving him the 3rd degree or anything of that sort. My dear fellow, 3rd degree, you've been watching too many old movies on the TV. The police don't use strong-arm methods in this country. They've been pretty brutal with some of our students who've been on demos, Braintree pointed out. But students are quite another matter, and demonstrating students get what they deserve. Political provocation is one thing, but domestic murders of the sort your friend Mr. Wilt seems to have indulged in come into a different category altogether. I can honestly say that in all my years in the legal profession, I have yet to come across a case in which the police did not treat a domestic murderer with great care and not a little sympathy. After all, they're nearly all married men themselves, and in any case, Mr. Wilt has a degree, and that always helps. If you are a professional man, and in spite of what some people may say, lecturers in technical colleges are members of a profession, if only marginally, then you can rest assured that the police will do nothing in the least untoward. Mr. Wilt is perfectly safe. And Wilt felt safe. He sat in the interview room and contemplated Inspector Flint with interest. Motivation. Now, there's an interesting question, he said. If you'd asked me why I married Eva in the first place, I'd have had some trouble trying to explain myself. I was young at the time, and... Wilt, said the inspector, I didn't ask you why you married your wife. I asked you why you decided to murder her. I didn't decide to murder her, said Wilt. It was a spontaneous action? A momentary impulse you couldn't resist? An act of madness you now regret? It was none of those things. In the first place, it was not an act. It was a mere fantasy. But you admit that the thought crossed your mind. Inspector, said Wilt, if I acted upon every impulse that crossed my mind, I would have been convicted of child rape, buggery, burglary, assault with intent to commit grievous bodily harm, and mass murder long ago. All those impulses crossed your mind. At some time or other, yes, said Wilt. You've got a bloody odd mind. Which I dare say is something I share with the vast majority of mankind. I dare say that even you, in your odd contemplative moments, have... Wilt, said the inspector, I don't have odd contemplative moments. Not until I met you, anyhow. Now then, you admit you thought of killing your wife. I said the notion had crossed my mind, particularly when I have to take the dog for a walk. It's a game I play with myself, no more than that. A game? You take a dog for a walk and think of ways and means of killing Mrs. Wilt? I don't call that a game, I call it premeditation. Not badly put, said Wilt with a smile. The meditation bit. Eva curls up in the lotus position on the living room rug and thinks beautiful thoughts. I take the bloody dog for a walk and think dreadful ones, while Clem defecates on the grass verge in Grenville Gardens, and in each case, the end result is just the same. Eva gets up and cooks supper and washes up, and I come home and watch the box or read and go to bed. Nothing has altered one way or the other. It has now, said the inspector. Your wife has disappeared off the face of the earth, together with a brilliant young scientist and his wife, and you sit there waiting to be charged with their murder. Which I don't happen to have committed, said Wilt. Oh, well, these things happen. The moving finger writes, and having writ... Fuck the moving finger! Where are they? Where did you put them? You're going to tell me. Wilt sighed. I wish I could, he said. I really do. Now you've got that plastic doll. No, we haven't. Not by a long chalk. We're still going down through solid rock. We won't get whatever's down there until tomorrow at the earliest. Something to look forward to, said Wilt. Then, I suppose, you'll let me go. Like hell I will. I'll have you up for remand on Monday. Without any evidence of murder? Without a body? You can't do that. Inspector Flint smiled. Wilt, he said, I've got news for you. We don't need a body. We can hold you on suspicion. We can bring you up for trial, and we can find you guilty without a body. You may be clever, but you don't know your law. Well, I must say you fellows have an easy job of it. You mean you could go out in the street and pick up some perfectly innocent bypasser and lug him in here and charge him with murder without any evidence at all? Evidence? We've got evidence, all right. We've got a blood-spattered bathroom with a busted-down door. We've got an empty house in a filthy mess. And we've got some bloody thing or other down that pile hole, and you think we haven't got evidence? You've got it wrong. Makes two of us, said Wilt. And I'll tell you another thing, Wilt. The trouble with bastards like you is that you're too clever by half. You overdo things, and you give yourselves away. Now, if I'd been in your shoes, I'd have done two things. Know what they are? No, said Wilt, I don't.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the next cassette, side 9.
I'd have washed that bathroom down, number 1. And number 2, I'd have stayed away from that hole. I wouldn't have tried to lay a false trail with notes, making sure the caretaker saw you, and turning up at Mr. Braintree's house at midnight covered in mud. I'd have sat tight and said nothing. But I didn't know about those bloodstains in the bathroom, and if it hadn't been for that filthy doll, I wouldn't have dumped the thing down the hole. I'd have gone to bed. Instead of which, I got pissed and acted like an idiot. Let me tell you something else, Wilt, said the inspector. You are an idiot. A fucking cunning idiot, but an idiot all the same. You need your head read. Better make a change from this lot, said Wilt. What would? Having my head read, instead of sitting here and being insulted. Inspector Flint studied him thoughtfully. You mean that? He asked. Mean what? About having your head read. Would you be prepared to undergo an examination by a qualified psychiatrist? Oh, why not? Said Wilt. Anything to help pass the time. Quite voluntarily, you understand. Nobody is forcing you to. But if you want... Listen, Inspector. If seeing a psychiatrist will help to convince you that I have not murdered my wife, I'll be only too happy to. You can put me on a lie detector. You can pump me full of truth drugs. You can... There's no need for any of that other stuff, said Flint, and stood up. A good shrink will do very nicely. And if you think you can get away with guilty but insane, forget it. These blokes know when you're malingering madness. He went to the door and paused. Then he came back and leant across the table. Tell me, Wilt, he said, tell me just one thing. How come you sit there so coolly? Your wife is missing. We have evidence of murder. We have a replica of her, if you are to be believed, under 30 feet of concrete, and you don't turn a hair. How do you do it?" "Inspector," said Wilt, "if you had taught gas fitters for 10 years and been asked as many damn fool questions in that time as I have, you'd know. Besides, you haven't met Eva. When you do, you see why I'm not worried. Eva is perfectly capable of taking care of herself. She may not be bright, but she's got a built-in survival kit." "Jesus, Wilt. With you around for 12 years, she must have something." "Oh, she has. You'll like Eva when you meet her. You get on like a house on fire. You've both got literal minds and an obsession with trivia. You can take a worm cast and turn it into Mount Everest." "Worm cast? Wilt, you sicken me," said the inspector, and left the room. Wilt got up and walked up and down. He was tired of sitting down. On the other hand, he was well satisfied with his performance. He had surpassed himself, and he took pride in the fact that he was reacting so well to what most people would have considered an appalling predicament. But to Wilt it was something else, a challenge. The first real challenge he'd had to meet for a long time. Gas fitters and plasterers had challenged him once, but he'd learned to cope with them. You jolly them along. Let them talk, ask questions, divert them, get them going, accept their red herrings, and hand out a few of your own. But above all, you had to refuse to accept their preconceptions. Whenever they asserted something with absolute conviction as a self-evident truth, like all wogs began at Calais, all you had to do was agree, and then point out that half the great men in English history had been foreigners, like Marconi or Lord Beaverbrook, and that even Churchill's mother had been a Yank. Or talk about the Welsh being the original Englishmen, and the Vikings and the Danes, and from that lead them off through Indian doctors to the National Health Service and birth control, and any other topic under the sun that would keep them quiet and puzzled, and desperately trying to think of some ultimate argument that would prove you wrong. Inspector Flint was no different. He was more obsessive, but his tactics were just the same. And besides, he'd got hold of the wrong end of the stick with a vengeance, and it amused Wilt to watch him trying to pin a crime on him that he hadn't committed. It made him feel almost important, and certainly more of a man than he'd done for a long, long time. He was innocent, and there was no question about it. In a world where everything else was doubtful and uncertain and open to skepticism, the fact of his innocence was sure. For the first time in his adult life, Wilt knew himself to be absolutely right, and the knowledge gave him a strength that he never supposed he'd possessed. And besides, there was no question in his mind that Eva would turn up eventually, safe and sound, and more than a little subdued, when she realized what her impulsiveness had led to. Serve her right for giving him that disgusting doll. She'd regret that to the end of her days. Yes, if anybody was going to come off badly in this affair, it was dear old Eva, with her bossiness and her busyness. She'd have a job explaining it to Mavis Mottram and the neighbours. Wilt smiled to himself at the thought. And even the tech would have to treat him differently in future, and with a new respect. Wilt knew the liberal conscience too well, not to suppose that he would appear anything less than a martyr when he went back, and a hero. They would bend over backwards to convince themselves that they hadn't thought him as guilty as hell. He'd get promotion, too. Not for being a good teacher, but because they'd need to salve their fragile confidences. Talk about killing the fatted calf. 14. At the Tech, there was no question of killing the fatted calf, at least not for Henry Wilt. The imminence of the CNAA visitation on Friday, coinciding, as it apparently would, with the resurrection of the late Mrs. Wilt, was causing something approaching panic. The course board met in almost continuous session, and memoranda circulated so furiously that it was impossible to read one before the next arrived. "Can't we postpone the visit?" Dr. Cox asked. "I can't have them in my office discussing bibliographies with bits of Mrs. Wilt being dug out of the ground outside the window." "I have asked the police to make themselves as inconspicuous as possible," said Dr. Mayfield. "With conspicuous lack of success so far," said Dr. Board. "There couldn't be more in evidence. There are 10 of them peering down that hole at this very moment." The Vice Principal struck a brighter note. "Well, you'll be glad to hear that we've managed to restore power to the canteen," he told the meeting, "so that we should be able to lay on a good lunch." "I just hope I feel up to eating," said Dr. Cox. "The shocks of the last few days have done nothing to improve my appetite, and when I think of poor Mrs. Wilt—" "Oh, try not to think of her," said the Vice Principal, but Dr. Cox shook his head. "You try not to think of her with a damn great boring machine grinding away outside your office window all day." "Talking about shocks," said Dr. Board, "I still can't understand how the driver of that mechanical corkscrew managed to escape electrocution when they cut through the power cable." "Considering the problems we are faced with, I hardly think that's a relevant point just at present," said Dr. Mayfield. "What we have got to stress to the members of the CNAA committee is that this degree is an integrated course with a fundamental substructure grounded thematically on a concomitance of cultural and sociological factors in no way unsuperficially disparate, and with a solid quota of academic content to give students an intellectual and cerebral hemorrhage," suggested Dr. Board. Dr. Mayfield regarded him balefully. "I really do think this is no time for flippancy," he said angrily. "Either we're committed to the joint honours degree or we're not. Furthermore, we have only until tomorrow to structure our tactical approach to the visitation committee. Now, which is it to be?" "Which is what to be?" asked Dr. Board. "What has our commitment, or lack of it, to do with structuring, for want of several far better words, our so-called tactical approach to a committee which, since it's coming all the way from London to us and not vice versa, is presumably approaching us?" "Vice Principal," said Dr. Mayfield, "I really must protest. Dr. Board's attitude at this late stage in the game is quite incomprehensible. If Dr. Board could even begin to understand 1/10 of the jargon Dr. Mayfield seems to suppose is English, he might be in a better position to express his opinion," interrupted Dr. Board. "As it is, incomprehensible applies to Dr. Mayfield's syntax, not to my attitude. I have always maintained—" "Gentlemen," said the Vice Principal, "I think it would be best if we avoided interdepartmental wrangles at this point in time and got down to business." There was a silence broken finally by Dr. Cox. "Do you think the police could be persuaded to erect a screen round that hole?" he asked. "I shall certainly suggest it to them," said Dr. Mayfield, and they passed on to the matter of entertainment. "I have arranged for there to be plenty of drinks before lunch," said the Vice Principal, "and in any case lunch will be judiciously delayed to allow them to get into the right mood, so that the afternoon sessions should be cut short and proceed, hopefully, more smoothly." "Just as long as the catering department doesn't serve toad in the hole," said Dr. Board. The meeting broke up acrimoniously. So did Mr. Morris's encounter with the crime reporter of the Sunday Post. "Of course I didn't tell the police that I employed homicidal maniacs as a matter of policy," he shouted at the reporter. "And in any case what I said was, as I understood it, to be treated in the strictest confidence. But you did say you thought Wilt was insane, and quite a number of liberal studies lecturers were off their heads." Mr. Morris looked at the man with loathing. "To put the record straight, what I said was that some of them were—" "Off their rockers?" suggested the reporter. "No, not off their rockers," shouted Mr. Morris. "Merely, well, shall we say, slightly unbalanced." "But that's not what the police said, you said. They say, quote—" "I don't care what the police say," I said. "I know what I said and what I didn't, and if you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything. You made a statement that half your staff are nuts, and I'm going to verify it." "Verify it?" snarled Mr. Morris. "You put words into my mouth I never said, and you call that verifying it?" "Well, did you say it or not? That's all I'm asking. I mean, if you express an opinion about your staff—" "Mr. MacArthur, what I think about my staff is my own affair. It has absolutely nothing to do with you or the rag you represent." 3 million people will be interested to read your opinion on Sunday morning," said Mr. MacArthur. "And I wouldn't be at all surprised if this Wilt character didn't sue you, if he ever gets out of the cop shop." "Sue me? What the hell could he sue me for?" "Calling him a homicidal maniac, for a start. Banner headlines, Head of Liberal Studies calls lecturer homicidal maniac. Should be good for 50,000. I'd be surprised if he got less." Mr. Morris contemplated destitution. "Even your paper would never print that," he muttered. "I mean, Wilt would sue you, too." "Oh, we're used to libel actions. They're run-of-the-mill stuff for us. We'd pay them out of petty cash. Now, if you'd be a bit more cooperative..." He left the suggestion in mid-air for Mr. Morris to digest. "What do you want to know?" he asked miserably. "Got any juicy drug scene stories for us?" asked Mr. MacArthur. "You know the sort of thing. Love orgies in lectures. That always gets the public. Teeny boppers having it off and all that. Give us a good one, and we'll let you off the hook about Wilt." "Get out of my office!" yelled Mr. Morris. Mr. MacArthur got up. "You're going to regret this," he said, and went downstairs to the students' canteen to dig up some dirt on Mr. Morris. "Not tests," said Wilt adamantly. "They're deceptive." "You think so?" said Dr. Pittman, consultant psychiatrist at the Fenland Hospital and professor of criminal psychology at the university. Being plagiocephalic didn't help either. "Well, I should have thought it was obvious," said Wilt. "You show me an ink blot, and I think it looks like my grandmother lying in a pool of blood. Do you honestly think I'm going to be fool enough to say so? I'd be daft to do that. So I say, a butterfly sitting on a geranium. It's the same every time. I think what it looks like and then say something completely different. Where does that get you?" "Well, it's still possible to infer something from that," said Dr. Pittman. "Well, you don't need a bloody ink blot to infer, do you?" said Wilt. Mr. Pittman made a note of Wilt's interest in blood. "You can infer things," said Wilt, "from just looking at the shape of people's heads." Dr. Pittman polished his glasses grimly. Heads were not things he liked inferences to be drawn from. "Mr. Wilt," he said, "I am here at your request to ascertain your sanity, and in particular to give an opinion as to whether or not I consider you capable of murdering your wife and disposing of her body in a singularly revolting and callous fashion. I shall not allow anything you may say to influence my ultimate and objective findings." Wilt looked perplexed. "I must say you're not giving yourself much room for manoeuvre. Since we've dispensed with mechanical aids like tests, I should have thought what I had to say would be the only thing that you could go on, unless, of course, you're going to read the bumps on my head. Isn't that a bit old-fashioned?" "Mr. Wilt," said Dr. Pittman, "the fact that you clearly have a sadistic streak and take pleasure in drawing attention to other people's physical infirmities in no way disposes me to conclude you are capable of murder." "Very decent of you," said Wilt. "Frankly, I'd have thought anyone was capable of murder, given the right, or, to be precise, the wrong circumstances." Dr. Pittman stifled the impulse to say how right he was. Instead, he smiled prognathously. "Would you say that you are a rational man, Henry?" he asked. Wilt frowned. "Just stick to Mr. Wilt, if you don't mind. This may not be a paid consultation, but I prefer a little formality." Dr. Pittman's smile vanished. "You haven't answered my question?" "No, I wouldn't say I was a rational man," said Wilt. "An irrational one, perhaps?" "Neither the one wholly nor the other wholly. Just a man." "And a man is neither one thing nor the other?" "Dr. Pittman, this is your province, not mine. But in my opinion, man is capable of reasoning, but not of acting within wholly rational limits. Man is an animal, a developed animal. Well, come to think of it, all animals are developed, if we're to believe Darwin. Let's just say man is a domesticated animal with elements of wildness about him." "And what sort of animal are you, Mr. Wilt?" said Dr. Pittman. "A domesticated animal or a wild one?" Here we go again. These splendidly simple dual categories that seem to obsess the modern mind. Either or. Kierkegaard, as that bitch Sally Pringsheim would say. "No, I'm not wholly domesticated. Ask my wife. She'll express an opinion on the matter." "In what respect are you undomesticated?" "I fart in bed, Dr. Pittman. I like to fart in bed. It's the trumpet call of the anthropoid ape in me, asserting its territorial imperative in the only way possible. In the only way possible? You haven't met Eva, said Wilt. When you'll do, you'll see that assertion is her forte, not mine. You feel dominated by Mrs. Wilt? I am dominated by Mrs. Wilt. She bullies you. She assumes the dominant role. Eva is Dr. Pittman. She doesn't have to assume anything. She just is. Is what? Now, there's the rub, said Wilt. What's today? You lose track of the time in this place. Thursday. Well, today being Thursday, Eva is Bernard Leach. Bernard Leach? The potter, Dr. Pittman, the famous potter, said Wilt. Now, tomorrow she'll be Margot Fontaine, and on Saturday we play bridge with the Mottrams, so she'll be Omar Sharif. On Sunday she's Elizabeth Taylor or Edna O'Brien, depending on what the colour supplements have in store for me. And in the afternoon we go for a drive, and she's Eva Wilt. It's about the only time in the week I meet her, and that's because I'm driving and she's got nothing to do but sit still and nag the pants off me. I begin to see the pattern, said Dr. Pittman. Mrs. Wilt is given to role-playing. This made for an unstable relationship in which you couldn't establish a distinctive and assertive role as a husband. Dr. Pittman, said Wilt, a gyroscope may, indeed must, spin. But in doing so, it achieves a stability that is virtually unequalled. Now, if you understand the principle of the gyroscope, you may begin to understand that our marriage does not lack stability. It may be damned uncomfortable coming home to a centrifugal force, but it bloody well isn't unstable. But just now you told me that Mrs. Wilt did not assume a dominant role. Now you tell me she's a forceful character. Eva is not forceful. She is a force. There's a difference. And as for character, she has so many, and they're so varied, it's difficult to keep up with them all. Let's just say that she throws herself into whoever she is with an urgency and compulsiveness that's not always appropriate. You remember that series of Garbo pictures they showed on TV some years back? Well, Eva was La Dame Camellia for 3 days after that, and she made dying of TB look like St. Vitus' dance. Talk about galloping consumption. I begin to get the picture, said Dr. Pittman, making a note that Wilt was a pathological liar with sadomasochistic tendencies. I'm glad someone does, said Wilt. Inspector Flint thinks I murdered her and the Pringheims in some sort of bloodlust and disposed of their bodies in some extraordinary fashion. He mentioned acid. I mean, it's crazy. Where on earth does one get nitric acid in the quantities necessary to dissolve 3 dead bodies, and one of them overweight at that? It doesn't bear thinking about. It certainly doesn't, said Dr. Pittman. In any case, do I look like a murderer? Continued Wilt cheerfully. Of course I don't. Now, if he'd said Eva had slaughtered the brutes, and in my opinion someone should have done years ago, I'd have taken him seriously. God help the poor sods who happen to be round when Eva takes it into her head that she's Lizzie Borden. Dr. Pittman studied him predaciously. Are you suggesting that Dr. and Mrs. Pringsheim were murdered by your wife? He asked. Is that what you're saying? No, said Wilt. I'm not. All I'm saying is that when Eva does things, she does them wholeheartedly. When she cleans the house, she cleans it. Let me tell you about the Harpic. She's got this thing about germs. Mr. Wilt, said Dr. Pittman hastily, I'm not interested in what Mrs. Wilt does with the Harpic. I came here to understand you. Now then, do you make a habit of copulating with a plastic doll? Is this a regular occurrence? Regular, said Wilt. Do you mean a normal occurrence, or recurring one? Now, your notion of what constitutes a normal occurrence may differ from mine. I mean, do you do it often? Interrupted Dr. Pittman. Do it, said Wilt. I don't do it at all. But I understand that you have placed particular emphasis on the fact that this doll had a vagina. Emphasis? I didn't have to emphasize the fact. The beastly thing was plainly visible. You find vaginas beastly, said Dr. Pittman, stalking his prey into the more familiar territory of sexual aberration. Taken out of context, yes, said Wilt, sidestepping. And with plastic ones you can leave them in context, and I still find them nauseating. By the time Dr. Pittman had finished the interview, he was uncertain what to think. He got up wearily and made for the door. "You've forgotten your hat, Doctor," said Wilt, holding it out to him. "Pardon my asking, but do you have them specially made for you?" "Well," said Inspector Flint, when Dr. Pittman came into his office, "what's the verdict?" "A verdict? That man should be put away for life." "You mean he's a homicidal maniac?" "I mean that no matter how he killed her, Mrs. Wilt must have been thankful to go. 12 years married to that man. Good God. It doesn't bear thinking about. "Well, that doesn't get us much forwarder," said the inspector. When the psychiatrist had left, having expressed the opinion that while Wilt had the mind of an intellectual jackrabbit, he couldn't, in all honesty, say that he was criminally insane. "We'll just have to see what turns up tomorrow." 15. What turned up on Friday was seen not only by Inspector Flint, Sergeant Yates, 12 other policemen, Barney and half a dozen construction workers, but several hundred tech students standing on the steps of the science block, most of the staff, and by all 8 members of the CNAA Visitation Committee, who had a particularly good view from the windows of the mock hotel lounge used by the catering department to train waiters and to entertain distinguished guests. Dr. Mayfield did his best to distract their attention. "We have structured the foundation course to maximize student interest," he told Professor Blacksendale, who headed the committee. But the professor was not to be diverted. His interest was maximized by what was being unstructured from the foundations of the new admin block. "How absolutely appalling," he muttered as Judy protruded from the hole. Contrary to Wilt's hopes and expectations, she had not burst. The liquid concrete had sealed her in too well for that, and if in life she had resembled in many particulars a real live woman, in death she had all the attributes of a real dead one. As the corpse of a murdered woman, she was entirely convincing. Her wig was matted and secured to her head at an awful angle by the concrete. Her clothes clung to her, and cement to them, while her legs had evidently been contorted to the point of mutilation, and her outstretched arm had, as Barney had foretold, a desperate appeal about it that was most affecting. It also made it exceedingly difficult to extricate her from the hole. The legs didn't help, added to which the concrete had given her a substance and stature approximate to that of Eva Wilt. "I suppose that's what they mean by rigor mortis," said Dr. Board, as Dr. Mayfield desperately tried to steer the conversation back to the joint honours degree. "Dear Lord," muttered Professor Baxendale. Judy had eluded the efforts of Barney and his men, and had slumped back down the hole. To think what she must have suffered. Did you see that damned hat? Dr. Mayfield had. He shuddered. Behind him, Dr. Board sniggered. "There's a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will," he said gaily. "At least Wilt saved himself the cost of a gravestone. All I have to do is prop her up with 'Here stands Eva Wilt, born so-and-so, murdered last Saturday,' carved across her chest. In life, monumental. In death, a monument." "I must say, Board," said Dr. Mayfield, "I find your sense of humour singularly ill-timed." "Well, I'll never be able to cremate her, that's for certain," continued Dr. Board. "And the undertaker who can fit that little lot into a coffin will be nothing short of a genius. Suppose I could always take a sledgehammer to her." In the corner, Dr. Cox fainted. "I think I'll have another whiskey, if you don't mind," said Professor Baxendale weakly. Dr. Mayfield poured him a double. When he turned back to the window, Judy was protruding once more from the hole. "The thing about embalming," said Dr. Board, "is that it costs so much. Now, I'm not saying that that thing out there is a perfect likeness of Eva Wilt as I remember her. For heaven's sake, do you have to go on about it? Snarled Dr. Mayfield, but Dr. Board was not to be stopped. Quite apart from the legs, there seems to be something odd about the breasts. I know Mrs. Wilt's were large, but they do seem to have been inflated. Probably due to the gases. They putrefy, you know, which would account for it. By the time the committee went into lunch, they had lost all appetite for food, and most of them were drunk. Inspector Flint was less fortunate. He didn't like being present at exhumations at the best of times, and particularly when the corpse on whose behalf he was acting showed such a marked inclination to go back where she came from. Besides, he was in two minds whether it was a corpse or not. It looked very like a corpse, and it certainly behaved like a corpse, albeit a very heavy one. But there was something about the knees that suggested that all was not anatomically as it should have been with whatever it was they had dug up. There was a double-jointedness and a certain lack of substance where the legs stuck forward at right angles that seemed to indicate that Mrs. Wilt had lost not only her life, but both kneecaps as well. It was this mangled quality that made Barney's job so difficult and exceedingly distasteful. After the body had dropped down the hole for the fourth time, Barney went down himself to assist from below. "If you swords drop her," he shouted from the depths, "you'll have two dead bodies down here. So hang on to that rope whatever happens. I'm going to tie it round her neck." Inspector Flint peered down the shaft. "You'll do no such thing," he shouted. "We don't want her decapitated. We want her all in one piece." "She is all in one bloody piece," came Barney's muffled reply. "That's one thing you don't have to worry about." "Can't you tie the rope round something else?" "Well, I could," Barney conceded. "But I'm not going to. Her leg's more likely to come off than her head, and I'm not going to be underneath her when it goes." "All right," said the inspector. "I just hope you know what you're doing, that's all. I'll tell you one thing. The sod who put her down here knew what he was doing, and no mistake." But this fifth attempt failed, like the previous four, and Judy was lowered into the depths, where she rested heavily on Barney's foot. "Go and get that bloody crane," he shouted. "I can't stand much more of this." "Nor can I," muttered the inspector, who still couldn't make up his mind what it was he was supposed to be disinterring. A doll dressed up to look like Mrs. Wilt, or Mrs. Wilt dressed up to look like something some demented sculptor forgot to finish. What few doubts he'd had about Wilt's sanity had been entirely dispelled by what he was presently witnessing. Any man who could go to the awful lengths Wilt had gone to render, and the word was entirely apposite whichever way you looked at it, either his wife or a plastic doll with a vagina, both inaccessible and horribly mutilated, must be insane. Sergeant Yates put his thoughts into words. "You're not going to tell me now that that bastard isn't off his rocker," he said, as the crane was moved into position and the rope lowered and attached to Judy's neck. "All right, now take her away," shouted Barney. In the dining room, only Dr. Board was enjoying his lunch. The 8 members of the CNAA committee weren't. Their eyes were glued to the scene below. "I suppose it could be said that she was in statu pupillari," said Dr. Board, helping himself to some more lemon meringue. "In which case we stand in loco parentis. Not a pleasant thought, gentlemen. Not that she was ever a very bright student. I once had her for an evening class in French literature. I don't know what she got out of Fleur du Mal, but I do remember thinking that Baudelaire—" "Dr. Board," said Dr. Mayfield drunkenly, "for a so-called man of culture, you're entirely without feeling." "Something I share with the late Mrs. Wilt, by the look of things," said Dr. Board, glancing out of the window. "And while we're still on the subject, things seem to be coming to a head. They do, indeed. Even Dr. Cox, recently revived and coaxed into having some mutton, looked out of the window. As the crane slowly winched Judy into view, the course board and committee rose and went to watch. It was not an edifying sight. Near the top of the shaft, Judy's left leg caught in a crevice, while her outstretched arm embedded itself in the clay. "Hold it!" shouted Barney indistinctly, but it was too late. Unnerved by the nature of his load, or in the mistaken belief that he had been told to lift harder, the crane driver hoisted away. There was a ghastly cracking sound as the noose tightened, and the next moment Judy's concrete head, capped by Eva Wilt's wig, looked as if it was about to fulfill Inspector Flint's prediction that she would be decapitated. In the event, he need not have worried. Judy was made of sterner stuff than might have been expected. As the head continued to rise, and the body to remain firmly embedded in the shaft, Judy's neck rose to the occasion. It stretched. "Dear God," said Professor Baxendale frantically. "Will it never end?" Dr. Board studied the phenomenon with increasing interest. "It doesn't look like it," he said. "Mind you, we do make a point of stretching our students, eh, Mayfield?" But Dr. Mayfield made no response. As Judy took on the configuration of an ostrich that had absent-mindedly buried its head in a pail of cement, he knew that the joint honours degree was doomed. "I'll say this for Mrs. Wilt," said Dr. Board. "She do hold on. No one could call her stiff-necked. Attenuated, possibly. One begins to see what Modigliani was getting at." "For God's sake, stop!" yelled Dr. Cox hysterically. "I think I'm going off my head." "Which is more than can be said for Mrs. Wilt," said Dr. Board callously. He was interrupted by another awful crack as Judy's body finally gave up the struggle with the shaft. With a shower of clay, it careered upwards to resume a closer relationship with the head, and hung naked, pink, and, now that the clothes and concrete had been removed, remarkably lifelike, at the end of the rope some 20 feet above the ground. "I must say," said Dr. Board, studying the vulva with relish, "I've never had much sympathy with necrophilia before, but I do begin to see its attractions now. Of course, it's only of historical interest, but in Elizabethan times it was one of the perks of an executioner." "Board!" screamed Dr. Mayfield. "I've known some fucking swine in my time." Dr. Board helped himself to some more coffee. "I believe the slang term for it is liking your meat cold." Underneath the crane, Inspector Flint wiped the mud from his face and peered up at the awful object swinging above him. He could see now that it was only a doll. He could also see why Wilt had wanted to bury the beastly thing. "Get it down! Get it down, for God's sake!" he bawled as the press photographers circled round him. But the crane driver had lost his nerve. He shut his eyes, pulled the wrong lever, and Judy began a further ascent. "Stop it! Stop it! That's the fucking evidence!" screamed the inspector, but it was already too late. As the rope wound round the final pulley, Judy followed. The concrete cap disintegrated, her head slid between the rollers, and her body began to swell. Her legs were the first to be affected. "I've often wondered what elephantiasis looked like," said Dr. Board. "Shelley had a phobia about it, I believe." Dr. Cox certainly had. He was gibbering in a corner, and the vice-principal was urging him to pull himself together. "An apt expression," observed Dr. Board above the gasps of horror, as Judy, now clearly 12 months pregnant, continued her transformation. "Early Minoan, wouldn't you say, Mayfield?" But Dr. Mayfield was past speech. He was staring dementedly at a rapidly expanding vagina some 14 inches long and 8 wide. There was a pop, and the thing became a penis, an enormous penis that swelled and swelled. He was going mad. He knew he was. "Now that," said Dr. Board, "takes some beating. I've heard about sex-change operations for men, but—" "Beating?" screamed Dr. Mayfield. "Beating? You can stand there cold-bloodedly and talk about... There was a loud bang. Judy had come to the end of her tether. So had Dr. Mayfield. The penis was the first thing to go. Dr. Mayfield the second. As Judy deflated, he hurled himself at Dr. Board, only to sink to the ground, gibbering. Dr. Board ignored his colleague. Who would have thought the old bag had so much wind in her? He murmured and finished his coffee. As Dr. Mayfield was led out by the vice-principal, Dr. Board turned to Professor Baxendale. I must apologize for Mayfield, he said. I'm afraid this joint honours degree has been too much for him. And to tell you the truth, I've always found him to be fundamentally unsound. A case of dementia post-Cox, I dare say. Inspector Flint drove back to the police station in a state bordering on lunacy. We've been made to look idiots, he snarled at Sergeant Yates. You saw them laughing. You heard the bastards. He was particularly incensed by the press photographers who had asked him to pose with the limp remnants of the plastic doll. We've been held up to public ridicule. Well, my God, somebody's going to pay. He hurled himself out of the car and lunged down the passage to the interview room. Right, Wilt, he shouted. You've had your bloody little joke, and a bloody nasty one it was too. So now we're going to forget the niceties and get to the bottom of this business. Wilt studied the torn piece of plastic. Looks better like that, if you ask me, he said. More natural, if you know what I mean. You'll look bloody natural if you don't answer my questions, yelled the inspector. Where is she? Where's who? Said Wilt. Mrs. fucking Wilt! Where did you put her? I've told you I didn't put her anywhere. And I'm telling you you did. Now either you're going to tell me where she is, or I'm going to beat it out of you. You can beat me up if you like, said Wilt, but it won't do you any good. Oh, yes, it will, said the inspector and took off his coat. I demand to see a solicitor, said Wilt hastily. Inspector Flint put his jacket on. I've been waiting to hear you say that. Henry Wilt, I hereby charge you with...
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette. Side 10.
In the reeds, Eva greeted the dawn of another day by blowing up the airbed for the 10th time. It had either sprung a leak or developed a fault in the valve. Whichever it was had made her progress exceedingly slow and had finally forced her to take refuge in the reeds away from the channel. Here, wedged between the stems, she'd spent a muddy night getting off the airbed to blow it up and getting back on to try and wash off the sludge and weeds that had adhered to her when she got off. In the process, she had lost the bottom half of her lemon loungers and had torn the top half so that by dawn she resembled less the obsessive housewife of 34 Parkview Avenue than a finalist in the heavyweight division of the Ladies' Mud Wrestling Championship. In addition, she was exceedingly cold and was glad when the sun came up, bringing with it the promise of a hot summer day. All she had to do now was to find her way to land or open water and get someone to... At this point, Eva became aware that her appearance was likely to cause some embarrassment. The lemon loungers had been sufficiently outré to make her avoid walking down the street when she'd had them on. With them largely off, she certainly didn't want to be seen in public. On the other hand, she couldn't stay in the reeds all day. She plunged on, dragging the airbed behind her, half swimming, but for the most part trudging through mud and water. At last she came out of the reeds into open water and found herself looking across a stretch to a house, a garden that sloped down to the water's edge, and a church. It seemed a long way across, but there was no boat in sight. She would have to swim across and just hope that the woman who lived there was sympathetic and, better still, large enough to lend her some clothes until she got home. It was at this point that Eva discovered that she'd left her handbag somewhere in the reeds. She remembered having it during the night, but it must have fallen off the airbed when she was blowing it up. Well, she couldn't go back and look for it now. She'd just have to go on without it and ring Henry up and tell him to come out in the car and get her. He could bring some clothes, too. Yes, that was it. Eva Wilt climbed onto the airbed and began to paddle across. Halfway over, the airbed went down for the 11th time. Eva abandoned it and struggled on in the life jacket. But that, too, impeded her progress, and she finally decided to take it off. She trod water and tried to undo it, and after a struggle managed to get it off. In the process, the rest of the lemon loungers disintegrated, so that by the time she reached the bank, Eva Wilt was exhausted and quite naked. She crawled into the cover of a willow tree and lay panting on the ground. When she'd recovered, she stood up and looked around. She was at the bottom of the garden, and the house was 100 yards away up the hill. It was a very large house by Eva's standards, and not the sort that she would feel at home in at the best of times. For one thing, it appeared to have a courtyard with stables at the back. And to Eva, whose knowledge of large country houses was confined to what she'd seen on TV, there was the suggestion of servants, gentility, and a social formality that would make her arrival in the nude rather heavy-going. On the other hand, the whole place looked decidedly run down. The garden was overgrown and unkempt. Ornamental bushes, which might once have been trimmed to look like birds and animals, had reverted to strange and vaguely monstrous shapes. Rusted hoops leant half-hidden in the grass of an untended croquet lawn. A tennis net sagged between posts, and an abandoned greenhouse boasted a few panes of lichened grass. Finally, there was a dilapidated boathouse and a rowing boat. All in all, the domain had a sinister and imposing air to it, which wasn't helped by the presence of a small church hidden among trees to the left and a neglected graveyard beyond an old iron fence. Eva peered out from the weeping willow and was just about to leave its cover when the French windows opened and a man came out onto the terrace with a pair of binoculars and peered through them in the direction of Eel Stretch. He was wearing a black cassock and a dog collar. Eva went back behind the tree and considered the awkwardness of her situation and lack of attire. It was all extremely embarrassing. Nothing on earth would make her go up to the house, the vicarage, with nothing on. Parkview Avenue hadn't prepared her for situations of this sort. Rossiter Grove hadn't prepared Gaskell for the situation he found when Sally woke him with, "Noah, baby, it's dry-wise topside, time to fly the coop." He opened the cabin door and stepped outside to discover that Eva had already flown and had taken the airbed and life jackets with her. "You mean you left her outside all night?" he said. "Now we're really up shit creek. No paddle, no airbed, no damn life jackets, no nothing." "Well, I didn't know she'd do something crazy like take off with everything," said Sally. "You leave her outside in the pouring rain all night, she's got to do something. She's probably frozen to death by now, or drowned." "She tried to kill me. You think I was going to let her in when she tried to do that? Anyhow, it's all your fault for shooting your mouth off about that doll." "You tell that to the law when they find her body floating downstream. You just explain how come she goes off in the middle of a storm." "You're just trying to scare me," said Sally. "I didn't make her go or anything." "Well, it's going to look peculiar if something has happened to her, is all I'm saying. And you tell me how we're going to get off here now. You think I'm going to swimming without a life jacket? You're mistaken. I'm no Spitz." "My hero," said Sally. Gaskell went into the cabin and looked in the cupboard by the stove. "And another thing, we got a food problem and water. There's not much left." "Well, you got us into this mess. You think of a way out," said Sally. Gaskell sat down on the bunk and tried to think. There had to be some way of letting people know that they were there and in trouble. They couldn't be far from land. For all he knew, dry land was just the other side of the reeds. He went out and climbed on top of the cabin, but apart from the church spire in the distance, he could see nothing beyond the reeds. Perhaps if they got a piece of cloth and waved it, someone would spot it. He went down and fetched a pillowcase and spent 20 minutes waving it above his head and shouting. Then he returned to the cabin and got out the chart and pored over it in a vain attempt to discover where they were. He was just folding the map up when he spotted the pieces of Scrabble still lying on the table. Letters. Individual letters. Now, if they had something that would float up in the air with letters on it, like a kite. Gaskell considered ways of making a kite and gave it up. Perhaps the best thing, after all, was to make smoke signals. He fetched an empty can from the kitchen and filled it with fuel oil from beside the engine and soaked a handkerchief in it and clambered up to the cabin roof. He lit the handkerchief and tried to get the oil to burn. But when it did, there was very little smoke and the tin got too hot to hold. Gaskell kicked it into the water where it fizzled out. "Genius, baby," said Sally. "You're the greatest." "Yeah, well, if you can think of something practical, let me know." "Try swimming." "Try drowning," said Gaskell. "You could make a raft or something." "I could hack this boat of she-makers up. That's all we need." "I saw a movie once where there were these gauchos or Romans or something, and they came to a river and wanted to cross, and they used pig's bladders," said Sally. "Right now, all we don't have is a pig," said Gaskell. "You could use the garbage bags in the kitchen," said Sally. Gaskell fetched a plastic bag and blew it up and tied the end with string. Then he squeezed it. The bag went down. Gaskell sat down despondently. There had to be some simple way of attracting attention, and he certainly didn't want to swim out across that dark water clutching an inflated garbage bag. He fiddled with the pieces of Scrabble and thought once again about kites or balloons. Balloons. "You got those rubbers you use?" he asked suddenly. "Jesus, at a time like this, you get a hard-on?" said Sally. "Forget sex. Think of some way of getting us off here." "I have," said Gaskell. "I want those skins." "You gonna float downriver on a pontoon of condoms?" "Balloons," said Gaskell. "We blow them up and paint letters on them and float them in the wind." "Genius, baby," said Sally, and went into the toilet. She came out with a sponge bag. "Here they are. For a moment there, I thought you wanted me." "Oh, days of wine and roses," said Gaskell, "are over. Remind me to divorce you." He tore a packet open and blew a contraceptive out and tied a knot in its end. "On what grounds?" "Like you're a lesbian," said Gaskell, and held up the dildo. "This and kleptomania and the habit you have of putting other men in dolls and knotting them, you name it, I'll use it. Like you're a nymphomaniac." "You wouldn't dare. Your family would love it. The scandal." "Try me," said Gaskell, and blew up another condom. "Plastic freak." "Bull dyke." Sally's eyes narrowed. She was beginning to think he meant what he said about divorce. And if Gaskell divorced her in England, what sort of alimony would she get? Very little. There were no children, and she had the idea that British courts were mean in matters of money. So was Gaskell, and there was his family too, rich and mean. She sat and eyed him. "Where's your nail varnish?" Gaskell asked when he'd finished, and 12 contraceptives cluttered the cabin. "Drop dead," said Sally, and went out on deck to think. She stared down at the dark water and thought about rats and death and being poor again and liberated. The rat paradigm. The world was a rotten place. People were objects to be used and discarded. It was Gaskell's own philosophy, and now he was discarding her. And one slip on this oily deck could solve her problems. All that had to happen was for Gaskell to slip and drown, and she would be free and rich, and no one would ever know. An accident. Natural death. But Gaskell could swim, and there had to be no mistakes. Try it once and fail, and she wouldn't be able to try again. He'd be on his guard. It had to be certain, and it had to be natural. Gaskell came out on deck with the contraceptives. He'd tied them together and painted on each one a single letter with nail varnish, so that the whole read, "Help, SOS, help." He climbed up onto the cabin roof and launched them into the air. They floated up for a moment, were caught in the light breeze, and sagged sideways down onto the water. Gaskell pulled them in on the string and tried again. Once again, they floated down onto the water. "I'll wait until there's some more wind," he said, and tied the string to the rail where they bobbed gently. Then he went into the cabin and lay on the bunk. "What are you going to do now?" Sally asked. "Sleep. Wake me when there's a wind." He took off his glasses and pulled a blanket over him. Outside, Sally sat on a locker and thought about drowning. In bed. "Mr. Gosdyke," said Inspector Flint, "you and I have been dealing for a good many years now, and I'm prepared to be frank with you. I don't know." "But you've charged him with murder," said Mr. Gosdyke. "He'll come up for remand on Monday. In the meantime, I'm going to go on questioning him." But surely the fact that he admits burying a life-size doll, dressed in his wife's clothes, Gosdyke, in his wife's clothes, don't forget that. It still seems insufficient to me. Can you be absolutely sure that a murder has been committed? 3 people disappear off the face of the earth without a trace. They leave behind them 2 cars, a house littered with unwashed glasses and the leftovers of a party. You should see that house. A bathroom and landing covered with blood. They could have gone in someone else's car. They could have, but they didn't. Dr. Pringsheim didn't like being driven by anyone else. We know that from his colleagues at the Department of Biochemistry. He had a rooted objection to British drivers. Don't ask me why, but he had. Trains, buses, planes? Checked, rechecked, and checked again. No one answering their description used any form of public or private transport out of town. And if you think they went on a bicycle ride, you're wrong again. Dr. Pringsheim's bicycle is in the garage. You can forget they're going anywhere. They died, and Mr. Smart Alec Wilt knows it. I still don't see how you can be so sure, said Mr. Gosdyke. Inspector Flint lit a cigarette. Just look at his actions. His admitted actions, and see what they add up to, he said. He gets a life-size doll. Where from? He said it was given to him by his wife. Where he got it from doesn't matter. Well, he says he first saw the thing at the Pringsheim's house. Well, perhaps he did. I'm prepared to believe that. Wherever he got it, the fact remains that he dressed it up to look like Mrs. Wilt. He puts it down that hole at the tech, a hole he knows is going to be filled with concrete. He makes certain he's seen by the caretaker when he knows that the tech is closed. He leaves a bicycle covered with his fingerprints and with a book of his in the basket. He leaves a trail of notes to the hole. He turns up at Mrs. Braintree's house at midnight covered in mud and says he's had a puncture, which he hasn't. Now you're not going to tell me that he hasn't got something in mind. Well, he says that he was merely trying to dispose of that doll. And he tells me he was rehearsing his wife's murder. He's admitted that. Yes, but only in fantasy. His story, to me, is that he wanted to get rid of that doll, Mr. Gosdyke persisted. Then why the clothes? Why blow the thing up, and why leave it in such a position as it's bound to be spotted when the concrete was poured down? Why didn't he cover it with earth, if he didn't want it to be found? Why didn't he just burn the bloody thing or leave it by the roadside? It just doesn't make sense. Unless you see it as a deliberate plan to draw our attention away from the real crime. The inspector paused. Well, no, the way I see it is that something happened at that party we don't know anything about. Perhaps Wilt found his wife in bed with Dr. Pringsheim. He killed them both. Mrs. Pringsheim puts in an appearance and he kills her too. How? Said Mr. Gosdyke. You didn't find that much blood. He strangled her. He strangled his own wife. He battered Pringsheim to death. Then he hides the body somewhere, goes home and lays the doll trail. On Sunday, he disposes of the real bodies. Where? Well, God alone knows. But I'm going to find out. All I know is that a man who can think up a scheme like this one is bound to have thought of somewhere diabolical to put the real victims. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that he'd spent Sunday making illegal use of the crematorium. Whatever he did, you can be sure he did it thoroughly. But Mr. Gosdyke remained unconvinced. I wish I knew how you could be so certain, he said. Mr. Gosdyke, said the inspector wearily, you've spent 2 hours with your client. I've spent the best part of the week, and I've learned one thing from the experience, and it's this. The sod in there knows what he's doing. Any normal man in his position would have been worried and alarmed and downright frightened. Any innocent man faced with a missing wife and the evidence we've got of murder would have had a nervous breakdown. Not Wilt. No, no. He sits in there as bold as you please and tells me how to conduct the investigation. Now, if anything convinces me that that bastard is as guilty as hell, that does. He did it, and I know it. And what's more, I'm going to prove it. He seems a bit worried now, said Mr. Gosdyke. He's got reason to be, said the inspector, because by Monday morning I'm going to get the truth out of him, even if it kills him and me both. Inspector, said Mr. Gosdyke, getting to his feet, I must warn you that I've advised my client not to say another word, and if he appears in court with a mark on him... Mr. Gosdyke, you should know me better than that. I'm not a complete fool, and if your client has any marks on him on Monday morning, they will not have been made by me or any of my men. You have my assurance on that. Mr. Gosdyke left the police station a puzzled man. He had to admit that Wilt's story hadn't been a very convincing one. Mr. Gosdyke's experience of murderers was not extensive, but he had a shrewd suspicion that men who confessed openly that they'd entertained fantasies of murdering their wives ended by admitting that they'd done so in fact. Besides his attempt to get Wilt to agree that he'd put the doll down the hole as a practical joke on his colleagues at the Tech, had failed hopelessly. Wilt had refused to lie, and Mr. Gosdyke was not used to clients who insisted on telling the truth. Inspector Flint went back into the interview room and looked at Wilt, and he pulled up a chair and sat down. "Henry," he said with an affability he didn't feel, "you and I are going to have a little chat." "What, another one?" said Wilt. "Mr. Gosdyke has advised me to say nothing." "He always does," said the inspector sweetly, "to clients he knows are guilty. Now, are you going to talk?" "I can't see why not. I'm not guilty, and it helps to pass the time." 17. It was Friday, and as on every other day of the week, the little church at Waterswick was empty. And as on every other day of the week, the vicar, the Reverend St. John Froude, was drunk. The two things went together, the lack of a congregation and the vicar's insobriety. It was an old tradition dating back to the days of smuggling, when brandy for the parson had been about the only reason the isolated hamlet had a vicar at all. And like so many English traditions, it died hard. The church authorities saw to it that Waterswick got idiosyncratic parsons whose awkward enthusiasms tended to make them unsuitable for more respectable parishes, and they, to console themselves for its remoteness and lack of interest in things spiritual, got alcoholic. The Reverend St. John Froude maintained the tradition. He attended to his duties with the same Anglo-Catholic fundamentalist fervour that had made him so unpopular in Esher, and turned an alcoholic eye on the activities of his few parishioners who, now that brandy was not so much in demand, contented themselves with the occasional boatload of illegal Indian immigrants. Now, as he finished a breakfast of eggnog and Irish coffee, and considered the iniquities of his more egregious colleagues as related in the previous Sunday's paper, he was startled to see something wobbling above the reeds on Eel Stretch. It looked like balloons, white, sausage-shaped balloons that rose briefly, then disappeared. The Reverend St. John Froude shuddered, shut his eyes, opened them again, and thought about the virtues of abstinence. If he was right, and he didn't know whether he wanted to be or not, the morning was being profaned by a cluster of contraceptives, inflated contraceptives, wobbling erratically, where, by the nature of things, no contraceptive had ever wobbled before. At least he hoped it was a cluster. He was so used to seeing things in twos, when they were in fact ones, that he couldn't be sure if what looked like a cluster of inflated contraceptives wasn't just one, or, better still, none at all. He reeled off to his study to get his binoculars, and stepped out onto the terrace to focus them. By that time the manifestation had disappeared. The Reverend St. John Froude shook his head mournfully. Things, and in particular his liver, had reached a pretty pickle for him to have hallucinations so early in the morning. He went back into the house and tried to concentrate his attention on a case involving an archdeacon in Ongar who had undergone a sex-change operation before eloping with his verger. There was matter there for a sermon, if only he could think of a suitable text. At the bottom of the garden, Eva Wilt watched his retreat and wondered what to do. She had no intention of going up to the house and introducing herself in her present condition. She needed clothes, or at least some sort of covering. She looked around for something temporary, and finally decided on some ivy climbing up the graveyard fence. With one eye on the vicarage, she emerged from the willow tree and scampered across to the fence and through the gate into the churchyard. There she ripped some ivy off the trunk of a tree, and, carrying it in front of her rather awkwardly, made her way surreptitiously up the overgrown path towards the church. For the most part, her progress was masked from the house by the trees, but once or twice she had to crouch low and scamper from tombstone to tombstone, in full view of the vicarage. By the time she reached the church porch, she was panting, and her sense of impropriety had increased tenfold. If the prospect of presenting herself at the house in the nude offended her on grounds of social decorum, going into a church in the raw was positively sacrilegious. She stood in the porch and tried frantically to steel herself to go in. There were bound to be surplices for the choir in the vestry, and dressed in a surplice she could go up to the house. Or could she? Eva wasn't sure about the significance of surplices, and the vicar might be angry. Oh dear, it was all so awkward. In the end, she opened the church door and went inside. It was cold and damp and empty. Clutching the ivy to her, she crossed to the vestry door and tried it. It was locked. Eva stood shivering and tried to think. Finally, she went outside and stood in the sunshine, trying to get warm. In the staff room at the Tech, Dr. Board was holding court. All things considered, I think we came out of the whole business rather creditably, he said. The principal has always said he wanted to put the college on the map, and with the help of friend Wilt, it must be said he's succeeded. The newspaper coverage has been positively prodigious. I shouldn't be surprised if our student intake jumped astonishingly. The committee didn't approve our facilities, said Mr. Morris, so you can hardly claim their visit was an unqualified success. Well, personally, I think they got their money's worth, said Dr. Board. It's not every day you get a chance to see an exhumation and an execution at the same time. The one usually precedes the other, and certainly the experience of seeing what, to all intents and purposes, was a woman turn in a matter of seconds into a man, an instant sex change, was, to use a modern idiom, a mind-blowing one. Talking of poor Mayfield, said the head of geography, I understand he's still at the mental hospital. Committed? Asked Dr. Board, hopefully. Depressed and suffering from exhaustion. Hardly surprising. Anyone who can use language, abuse language like that is asking for trouble. Structure as a verb, for example. He'd set great store by the joint honours degree, and the fact that he's been turned down... Quite right, too, said Dr. Board. The educative value of stuffing second-rate students with fifth-rate ideas on subjects as diverse as medieval poetry and urban studies escapes me. Far better that they should spend their time watching the police dig up the supposed body of a woman coated in concrete, stretch her neck, rip all her clothes off her, hang her up, and finally blow her up until she explodes. Now, that is what I call a truly educational experience. It combines archaeology with criminology, zoology with physics, anatomy with economic theory, while maintaining the student's undivided attention all the time. If we must have joint honours degrees, let them be of that vitality. Practical, too. I'm thinking of sending away for one of those dolls. It still leaves unresolved the question of Mrs. Wilt's disappearance, said Mr. Morris. Ah, dear Eva, said Dr. Board wistfully. Having seen so much of what I imagine to be her, I shall, if I ever have the pleasure of meeting her again, treat her with the utmost courtesy. An amazingly versatile woman, and interestingly proportioned. I think I shall christen my doll Eva. But the police still seem to think she's dead. A woman like that can never die, said Dr. Board. She may explode, but her memory lingers on indelibly. In his study, the Reverend St. John Froude shared Dr. Board's opinion. The memory of a large and apparently naked lady he had glimpsed emerging from the willow tree at the bottom of his garden like some disgustingly oversized nymph and scuttling through the churchyard was not something he was ever likely to forget. Coming so shortly after the apparition of the inflated contraceptives, it lent weight to the suspicion that he had been overdoing things on the alcohol side. Abandoning the sermon he'd been preparing on the apostate Archdeacon of Ongar, he had had, by their fruits ye shall know them, in mind as a text. He got up and peered out of the window in the direction of the church, and was wondering if he shouldn't go down and see if there wasn't a large, fat, naked lady there, when his attention was drawn to the reeds across the water. They were there again, those infernal things. This time there could be no doubt about it. He grabbed his binoculars and stared furiously through them. He could see them much more clearly than the first time, and much more ominously. The sun was high in the sky, and a mist rose over Eel Stretch, so that the contraceptives had a luminescent sheen about them, an insubstantiality which was almost spiritual in its implications. Worse still, there appeared to be something written on them. The message was clear, if incomprehensible. It read, Peace up. The Reverend St. John Froude lowered his binoculars and reached for the whiskey bottle, and considered the significance of Aesop etched ectoplasmically against the sky. By the time he'd finished his third hurried glass, and had decided that spiritualism might after all have something to be said for it, though why you almost always found yourself in touch with a Red Indian who was acting by proxy for an aunt, which might account for the misspelling of pea soup while removing some of the less attractive ingredients from the stuff. The wind had changed the letters round. This time when he looked, the message read, "Eel pops." The vicar shuddered. What eel was popping, and how? "The sins of the spirit," he said reproachfully to his fourth glass of whiskey, before consulting the oracle once more. Poshels was followed by a he-pop, to be succeeded by Schluspuspo, which was even worse. The Reverend St. John Froude thrust his binoculars and the bottle of whiskey aside, and went down on his knees to pray for deliverance, or at least for some guidance in interpreting the message. But every time he got up to see if his wish had been granted, the combination of letters was as meaningless as ever or downright threatening. What, for instance, did Hellspo signify, or Slosh-heel? And finally determined to discover for himself the true nature of the occurrence, he put on his cassock and wove off down the garden path to the boathouse. "They shall rule the day," he muttered as he climbed into the rowing boat and took the oars. The Reverend St. John Froude held firm views on contraception. It was one of the tenets of his Anglo-Catholicism. In the cabin cruiser, Gaskell slept soundly. Around him, Sally made her preparations. She undressed and changed into the plastic bikini. She took a silk square from her bag and put it on the table, and she fetched a jug from the kitchen and, leaning over the side, filled it with water. Finally, she went into the toilet and made up her face in the mirror. When she emerged, she was wearing false eyelashes, her lips were heavily red, and pancake makeup obscured her pale complexion. She was carrying a bathing cap. She crossed the door of the galley and put an arm up and stuck her hip out. "Gaskell, baby," she called. Gaskell opened his eyes and looked at her. "What the hell gives?" "Like it, baby?" Gaskell put on his glasses. In spite of himself, he did like it. "If you think you're going to wheedle round me, you're wrong." Sally smiled. "Conserve the verbiage. You turn me on, biodegradable baby." She moved forward and sat on the bunk beside him. "What are you trying to do?" "Make it up, baby kink. You deserve a curve." She fondled him gently. "Like the old days, remember?" Gaskell remembered and felt weak. Sally leant forward and pressed him down onto the bunk. "Oh, surrogate Sally," she said, and unbuttoned his shirt. Gaskell squirmed. "What do you think?" "Don't think, kink," said Sally, and undid his jeans. "Only erect." "Oh, God," said Gaskell. The perfume, the plastic, the mask, her face and her hands were awakening ancient fantasies. He lay supine on the bunk, staring at her, while Sally undressed him. Even when she rolled him over on his face and pulled his hands behind his back, he made no resistance. "Bondage, baby," she said softly, and reached for the silk square. "No, Sally, no," he said weakly. Sally smiled grimly and tied his hands together, winding the silk between his wrists carefully before tightening it. When she'd finished, Gaskell whimpered, "You're hurting me." Sally rolled him over. "You love it," she said, and kissed him. She sat back and stroked him gently. "Harder, baby, real hard. Lift me, lover, sky high." "Oh, Sally, that's my baby, and now the waterproof." "There's no need. I like it better without." "But I do, G. I need it to prove you loved me till death did us part." She bent over and rolled it down. Gaskell stared up at her. Something was wrong. "And now the cap." She reached over and picked up the bathing cap. "The cap," said Gaskell. "Why the cap? I don't want that thing on." "Oh, but you do, sweetheart. It makes you look girl-wise." She fitted the cap over his head. "Now, into Salia, into Alia." She undid the bikini and lowered herself onto him. Gaskell moaned and stared up at her. She was lovely. It was a long time since she'd been so good. But he was still frightened. There was a look in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "Untie me," he pleaded. "You're hurting my arm." But Sally merely smiled and gyrated. "When you've come and gone, gee, baby. When you've been." She moved her hips. "Come, bum. Come quick." Gaskell shuddered. "Finished?" He nodded. "Finished," he sighed. "For good, baby. For good," said Sally. "That was it. You're past the last." "Past the last?" "You've come and gone, come and gone. It's Stickside for you now." "Stickside?" S for Sally, T for terminal, Y for you, and X for exit. "All that's left is this." She reached over and picked up the jug of muddy water. Gaskell turned his head and looked at it. "What's that for?" "For you, baby. Mother's milk." She moved up his body and sat on his chest. "Open your mouth." Gaskell Pringsheim stared at her frantically. He began to writhe. "You're mad. You're crazy." "Now just lie quietly and it won't hurt. It'll soon be over, lover. Natural death by drowning. In bed. You're making history." "You bitch, you murderous bitch." "Cerberus wise," said Sally, and poured the water into his mouth. She put the jug down and pulled the cap down over his face. The Reverend St. John Froude rode surprisingly steadily for a man with half a bottle of whiskey inside him and a wrath in his heart, and the nearer he got to the contraceptives, the greater his wrath became. It wasn't simply that he had been given a quite unnecessary fright about the state of his liver, but the sight of the things, he could see now that he was close to them, that they were real. It was rather that he adhered to the doctrine of sexual non-intervention. God, in his view, had created a perfect world, if the book of Genesis was to be believed, and it had been going downhill ever since. And the book of Genesis was to be believed, or the rest of the Bible made no sense at all. Starting from this fundamentalist premise, the Reverend St. John Froude had progressed erratically by way of Blake, Hawker, Leavis, and a number of obscurantist theologians to the conviction that the miracles of modern science were the works of the devil, that salvation lay in eschewing every material advance since the Renaissance and one or two before, and that nature was infinitely less red in tooth and claw than modern mechanized man. In short, he was convinced that the end of the world was at hand in the shape of a nuclear holocaust, and that it was his duty as a Christian to announce the fact. His sermons on the subject have been of such a vividly horrendous fervour as to lead to his exile in Waterswick. Now, as he rode up the channel into Eel Stretch, he fulminated silently against contraception, abortion, and the evils of sexual promiscuity. They were all symptoms and causes and causative symptoms of the moral chaos which life on earth had become. And finally, there were trippers. The Reverend St. John Froude loathed trippers. They fouled the little Eden of his parish with their boats, their transistors, and their unabashed enjoyment of the present. And trippers who desecrated the prospect from his study window with inflated condoms and meaningless messages were an abomination. By the time he came in sight of the cabin cruiser, he was in no mood to be trifled with. He rowed furiously across to the boat, tied up to the rail, lifted his cassock over his knees, and stepped aboard. In the cabin, Sally stared down at the bathing cap. It deflated and inflated, expanded and was sucked in against Gaskell's face, and Sally squirmed with pleasure. She was the liberatedest woman in the world, but the liberatedest. Gaskell was dying, and she would be free to be with $1 million in the kitty. And no one would ever know. When he was dead, she would take the cap off and untie him and push his body over the side into the water. Gaskell Pringsheim would have died a natural death by drowning. And at that moment, the cabin door opened, and she looked up at the silhouette of the Reverend St. John Froude in the cabin doorway. "What the hell?" she muttered, and leapt off Gaskell. The Reverend St. John Froude hesitated. He had come to say his piece, and say it he would, but he had clearly intruded on a very naked woman with a horribly made-up face in the act of making love to a man who, as far as a quick glance enabled him to tell, had no face at all. He began, and stopped. The man on the bunk had rolled onto the floor and was writhing there in a most extraordinary fashion. The Reverend St. John Froude stared down at him aghast. The man was not only faceless, but his hands were tied behind his back. "My dear fellow," said the vicar, appalled at the scene, and looked up at the naked woman for some sort of explanation. She was staring at him demonically and holding a large kitchen knife. The Reverend St. John Froude stumbled back into the cockpit as the woman advanced upon him, holding the knife in front of her with both hands. She was clearly quite demented. So was the man on the floor. He rolled about and dragged his head from side to side. The bathing cap came off, but the Reverend St. John Froude was too busy scrambling over the side into his rowing boat to notice. He cast off as the ghastly woman lunged towards him and began to row away, his original mission entirely forgotten. In the cockpit, Sally stood screaming abuse at him, and behind her a shape had appeared in the cabin door. The vicar was grateful to see that the man had a face now. Not a nice face, a positively horrible face, but a face for all that. And he was coming up behind the woman with some hideous intention. The next moment, the intention was carried out. The man hurled himself at her, the knife dropped onto the deck, the woman scrabbled at the side of the boat, and then slid forward into the water. Reverend St. John Froude waited no longer. He rowed vigorously away. Whatever appalling orgy of sexual perversion he had interrupted, he wanted none of it, and painted women with knives who called him a motherfucking son of a cunt-sucker, among other things, didn't elicit his sympathy when the object of their obscene passions pushed them into the water. And, in any case, they were Americans. Reverend St. John Froude had no time for Americans. They epitomized everything he found offensive about the modern world. Imbued with a new disgust for the present and an urge to hit the whiskey, he rowed home and tied up at the bottom of the garden. Behind him in the cabin cruiser, Gaskell ceased shouting. The priest who had saved his life had ignored his hoarse pleas for further help, and Sally was standing waist-deep in water beside the boat. Well, she could stay there. He went back into the cabin, turned so that he could lock the door with his tied hands, and then looked around for something to cut the silk scarf with. He was still very frightened.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the next cassette, side 11.
Right, said Inspector Flint. So what did you do then? Got up and read the Sunday papers. After that? I ate a plate of all-brown and drank some tea. Tea? You sure it was tea? Last time you said coffee. Which time? The last time you told it. I drank tea. What then? I gave Clem his breakfast. What sort? Chappy. Last time you said bonzo. This time I say chappy. Make up your mind. Which sort was it? What the fuck does it matter which sort it was? It matters to me. Chappy. And when you'd fed the dog? I shaved. Last time you said you had a bath. I had a bath and then I shaved. I was trying to save time. Forget the time, Wilt. We've got all the time in the world. What time is it? Shut up. What did you do then? Oh, for God's sake, what does it matter? What's the point in going over and over the same things? Shut up. Right, said Wilt. I will. When you'd shaved, what did you do? Wilt stared at him and said nothing. When you had shaved? But Wilt remained silent. Finally, Inspector Flint left the room and sent for Sergeant Yates. He's clammed up, he said wearily. So, what do we do now? Try a little physical persuasion? Flint shook his head. Gosdyke's seen him. If he turns up in court on Monday with so much as a hair out of place, he'll be all over us for brutality. There's got to be some other way. He must have a weak spot somewhere, but I'm damned if I can find it. Now, does he do it? Do what? Keep talking and saying nothing. Not one bloody useful thing. That sod's got more opinions on every topic under the flaming sun than I've got hair on my head. If we keep him awake for another 48 hours, he's bound to crack up. He'll take me with him, said Flint. We'll both go into court in straitjackets. In the interview room, Wilt put his head on the table. They'd be back in a minute with more questions, but a moment's sleep was better than none. Sleep. If only they'd let him sleep. What had Flint said? The moment you sign a confession, you can have all the sleep you want. Wilt considered the remark and its possibilities. A confession. But it would have to be plausible enough to keep them occupied while he got some rest, and at the same time so impossible that it'd be rejected by the court. A delaying tactic to give Eva time to come back and prove his innocence. It'd be like giving gas fitters 2 Shane to read while he sat and thought about putting Eva down the pile shaft. He should be able to think up something complicated that would keep them frantically active. How had he killed them? Beat them to death in the bathroom? No, not enough blood. Even Flint had admitted that much. So how? What was a nice, gentle way to go? Poor old Pinkerton had chosen a peaceful death when he stuck a tube up the exhaust pipe of his car. That was it. But why? There had to be a motive. Eva was having it off with Dr. Pringsheim. With that twit, not in the month of Sundays. Eva wouldn't have looked twice at Gaskell. But Flint wasn't to know that. And what about that bitch Sally? All 3 having it off together? Well, at least it would explain why he killed them all. And it would provide the sort of motive Flint would understand. And besides, it was right for that kind of party. So he got this pipe. What pipe? No need for a pipe. They were in the garage to get away from everyone else. No, that wouldn't do it. It would have to be the bathroom. How about Eva and Gaskell doing it in the bath? That was better. He'd bust down the door in a fit of jealousy. Much better. Then he'd drowned them. And then Sally had come upstairs, and he'd had to kill her too. That explained the blood. There'd been a struggle. He hadn't meant to kill her, but she'd fallen in the bath. So far, so good. But where had he put them? It had to be something good. Flint wasn't going to believe anything like the river. Somewhere that made sense of the doll down the hole. Flint had it firmly fixed in his head now that the doll had been a diversionary tactic. That meant that time entered into their disposal. Wilt got up and asked to go to the toilet. As usual, the constable came with him and stood outside the door. "Do you have to?" said Wilt. "I'm not going to hang myself with a chain." "To see you don't beat your meat," said the constable coarsely. Wilt sat down. Beat your meat. What a hell of an expression. Call to mind Meat One. Meat One? It was a moment of inspiration. Wilt got up and flushed the toilet. Meat One would keep them busy for a long time. He went back into the pale green room where the light buzzed. Flint was waiting for him. "You going to talk now?" he asked. Wilt shook his head. They would have to drag it out of him if his confession was to be at all convincing. He would have to hesitate, start to say something, stop, start again, appeal to Flint to stop torturing him, plead and start again. This trout needed tickling. Oh, well, it would help to keep him awake. "Are you going to start again at the beginning?" he asked. Inspector Flint smiled horribly. "Right at the beginning." "All right," said Wilt. "Have it your own way. Just don't keep asking me if I gave the dog Chappie or Bonzo. I can't stand all that talk about dog food." Inspector Flint rose to the bait. "Why not?" "It gets on my nerves," said Wilt with a shudder. The inspector leant forward. "Dog food gets on your nerves?" he said. Wilt hesitated pathetically. "Don't go on about it," he said. "Please don't go on." "Now then, which was it? Bonzo or Chappie?" said the inspector, scenting blood. Wilt put his head in his hands. "I won't say anything, I won't, no. Why must you keep asking me about food? Leave me alone." His voice rose hysterically, and with it, Inspector Flint's hopes. He knew when he'd touched the nerve, he was onto a good thing. 18. "Dear God," said Sergeant Yates. "But we had pork pies for lunch yesterday." "It's too awful." Inspector Flint rinsed his mouth out with black coffee and spat into the wash basin. He'd vomited twice and felt like vomiting again. "I knew it'd be something like that," he said with a shudder. "I just knew it. A man who can pull that doll trick had to have something really filthy up his sleeve." "But they may all have been eaten by now," said the sergeant. Flint looked at him balefully. "Why the hell do you think he laid that phony trail?" he asked. "To give them plenty of time to be consumed. His expression, consumed, not mine." You know what the shelf life of a pork pie is? Yates shook his head. 5 days. 5 days. So they went out on Tuesday, which leaves us 1 day to find them, or what remains of them. I want every pork pie in East Anglia picked up. I want every fucking sausage and steak and kidney pie that went out of Sweetbread's meat factory this week found and brought in. And every tin of dog food. Dog food? You heard me, said Inspector Flint, staggering out of the washroom. And while you're about here, you better make it cat food, too. You never know with Wilt. He's capable of leading us up the garden path in one important detail. But if they went into pork pies, what's all this about dog food? Where the hell do you think he put the odds and ends? And I do mean ends, Inspector Flint asked savagely. You don't imagine he was going to have people coming in and complaining they'd found a tooth or a toenail in a Sweetbread's pie they bought that morning? Not Wilt. That swine thinks of everything. He drowns them in their own bath. He puts them in plastic garbage bags and locks the bags in the garage while he goes home and sticks the doll down that fucking hole. And Sunday he goes back and picks them up and spends the day at the meat factory, all by himself. Well, if you want to know what he did on Sunday, you can read all about it in his statement. It's more than my stomach can stand.